Hey, welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We've got a brand new story lined up for you today, and we're thrilled to have you here. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Alfred Farrell stood at the kitchen sink, his weathered 40-year-old hands methodically washing dishes. 15 years as a postal worker had given him an appreciation for routine, but lately, something fell off. His wife Hope's sudden obsession with her appearance hadn't gone unnoticed. New clothes, a different hairstyle, hours spent primping in front of the mirror. At first, Alfred had been flattered, thinking perhaps she was making an effort for him. But as the weeks wore on, a gnawing suspicion took root in his gut. The sound of Hope's muffled giggles drifted from the living room, grating on his nerves like sandpaper. He dried his hands and padded quietly towards the source of the sound. Hope was sprawled on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, a secretive smile playing on her lips. As he entered, she startled, sitting up abruptly. "Oh, I've got to go," she said hurriedly into the phone. "Talk to you later, Beth." Alfred raised an eyebrow. "Beth from your book club?" Hope nodded, a touch too enthusiastically. "Yes, we were just discussing our latest read. You know how we get carried away." He did know. He also knew that Hope's book club met on Tuesdays, and it was Curly Thursday, but he said nothing, merely grunting an acknowledgement before retreating to the laundry room. As he sorted through the clothes, his hand brushed against Hope's purse. A slip of paper fell out, a receipt. Alfred's eyes widened as he read the itemized list. La Perla, $300 for a scrap of lace he'd never seen. The gnawing in his gut intensified. That night, after Hope had fallen asleep, Alfred lay awake, his mind racing. He thought about the 15 years they'd been married, the routines they'd settled into, the comfortable silences that had once felt like home but now seemed to stretch between them like a chasm. He made a decision. The next day, while Hope was at work, Alfred installed a discreet GPS tracker on her car. It was a simple device, easily hidden beneath the passenger seat. As he activated it, a wave of guilt washed over him. This wasn't who he was. He'd been a Boy Scout for Christ's sake. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Over the next week, Alfred watched as the little blinking that represented Hope's car made frequent trips to the Sunset Motel across town. Each time, his heart sank a little lower. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He called in sick to work, something he hadn't done in years. His supervisor, Dave, seemed concerned. "You all right, Farrell? You never take time off." "Just a bug." Alfred lied smoothly. "I'll be back tomorrow." Good as new. As soon as Hope left for work, Alfred followed at a discreet distance. His palms were sweaty on the steering wheel as he watched her pull into the Sunset Motel parking lot. He parked across the street, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. And then he saw him. Justin Hendricks, the popular local radio DJ and Hope's co-worker. Alfred had met him once at a company picnic. Charming, funny, with a voice like melted chocolate. Everything Alfred wasn't. He watched, feeling like he was having an out-of-body experience, as Hope practically ran into Justin's arms. Their lips met in a passionate kiss that made Alfred's stomach turn. With shaking hands, he raised his phone and snapped a few photos. Evidence. That's what he needed now. As he lowered the phone, his eyes met Justin's across the parking lot. For a split second, recognition flashed in the other man's eyes. Then Hope pulled him into the motel room, and the door slammed shut. Alfred sat in his car for a long time after that, staring at nothing. He felt hollow, gutted. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. A cold, calculating anger that surprised him with its intensity. His mind was already formulating a plan. Over the next few weeks, Alfred maintained a convincing facade of normalcy at home. He smiled at Hope over breakfast, asked about her day, and even surprised her with flowers one evening. All the while, he was meticulously gathering evidence. His first stop was the Sunset Motel. Sam, the owner, was a chatty man in his 60s who seemed flattered by Alfred's attention. Alfred spun a tale about writing a novel about small-town life, and Sam was more than happy to regale him with stories about the motel's colorful history. "You must see all sorts here," Alfred said casually one afternoon, leaning against the front desk. Sam chuckled. "Oh, you wouldn't believe the half of it. Affairs, mostly. People thinking they're being so clever, but it's always the same story." Alfred's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "I bet you have some security measures in place, though, for insurance purposes, if nothing else." Sam nodded towards a camera in the corner of the lobby. "Just the one there. Records everything that happens in this lobby." Alfred's eyes gleamed. "Fascinating. Mind if I take a look at how it's set up? For the book, you know." Sam hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Why not? Come on back." In the small office behind the front desk, Sam showed Alfred the ancient computer that served as a motel security system. It didn't take much for Alfred to convince Sam to let him study it for his novel. Once alone, Alfred's fingers flew over the keyboard. He may have been a postal worker, but he'd picked up some IT skills during his stint in the military. Within minutes, he had access to months of security footage. He found what he was looking for almost immediately: Hope and Justin entering and leaving the motel at regular intervals. Sometimes they looked furtive, glancing around nervously. Other times they were so wrapped up in each other they might as well have been alone in the world. Alfred copied the relevant footage onto a flash drive, his face impassive. When Sam returned, Alfred was leaning back in the chair, a pleasant smile on his face. "Find what you needed?" Sam asked. Alfred nodded. "Oh, yes. Very enlightening. Thank you, Sam." Back at home, Alfred turned his attention to Hope's email. She'd always been careless with her passwords, using the same one for everything: their anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on Alfred, as he easily gained access to her account. What he found made his blood run cold. Months of intimate exchanges between Hope and Justin, plans for their rendezvous, declarations of passion, and worst of all, lies about working overtime at the radio station to meet Justin. Alfred read every single email, saving copies to an external hard drive. By the time he was done, it was well past midnight. He heard Hope stirring upstairs and quickly shut down the computer. As he climbed into bed beside her, Hope mumbled sleepily, "Everything okay? You were up late." Alfred forced a smile. "Just catching up on some work." "Go back to sleep, honey." Hope snuggled closer to him, and Alfred lay rigid, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the vows they'd made, the life they'd built together, all of it based on a foundation of lies. In that moment, something inside Alfred hardened. The pain was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was overshadowed by a cold, calculating anger. He reached for the bedside table, pulling out a small notebook. In the dim light of the alarm clock, he began to write. Every detail of Hope's betrayal, every piece of evidence he'd gathered, it would become his journal, a record of his emotional journey. And though he didn't know it yet, it would become crucial to his plan. The next morning, Alfred called his supervisor at the post office. "Dave, it's Alfred. I need to take a week off. Family emergency out of state." Dave sounded concerned. "Everything all right, Farrell? This isn't like you." Alfred forced a note of worry into his voice. "My sister's in the hospital. Nothing too serious. But I need to be there. You understand, right?" Of course. Take all the time you need." With that taken care of, Alfred set his plan in motion. His first stop was a small, cash-only apartment across town. The landlord didn't ask questions when Alfred handed over 3 months' rent in cash, using the name Nick Buford. Next, he visited a graphic designer in the next town over. The young woman looked skeptical when Alfred explained what he wanted: a life-size promotional poster for a surprise anniversary party. Alfred nodded, his face a mask of enthusiasm. "My wife's always wanted to be a movie star. I thought it would be fun to make her the star of her own movie poster." He handed over the photos he'd taken of Hope and Justin outside the motel. The designer's eyebrows rose, but she took the job, agreeing to create a life-size design. Back in town, Alfred made a stop at the home of Marissa, a mutual friend of his and Hope's. She was delighted to see him. Alfred, what a nice surprise. Come in. Over coffee, Alfred spun a tale about planning surprise parties for both Hope and Justin. I was hoping you might have spare keys to their houses, he said casually. You know, for decorating and such. Marissa hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Oh, why not? It's for a good cause, after all. As he left Marissa's house, keys to both Hope and Justin's homes in hand, Alfred felt a twinge of guilt. He'd never been a good liar before, but he was learning fast. That evening, as Hope chatted about her day over dinner, Alfred nodded and smiled in all the right places. But his mind was elsewhere, running through the logistics of his plan. He had learned that morning that there were budget cuts coming at work. His job might be on the line. It added a sense of urgency to his actions. After dinner, while Hope was engrossed in her favorite TV show, Alfred slipped down to the basement. He powered up his computer and began researching divorce laws. Property division, alimony, grounds for divorce. He took meticulous notes. Then he turned his attention to his personal assets, investments, savings accounts, their joint checking account. He began the process of liquidating what he could, moving money around in a complex shell game. As he worked, Alfred felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt in control. Hope might have betrayed him, but he would have the last laugh. He glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. He could hear Hope moving around upstairs, probably wondering where he was. For a moment, he considered going up, playing the role of devoted husband one more time. Instead, he turned back to his computer. He had work to do, preparing for all contingencies. The night air was thick with anticipation as Alfred Farrell crouched in the shadows outside the WKRP radio station. His heart hammered against his ribs, a steady rhythm that matched the ticking of his watch. 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until the cleaning crew's shift change. 15 minutes until he set his plan in motion. He adjusted the backpack slung over his shoulder, feeling the weight of the rolled-up poster inside. The life-size image of Hope and Justin, caught in a passionate embrace outside the Sunset Motel, felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. And Alfred was about to light the fuse. As the last of the cleaning staff trickled out of the building, Alfred made his move. He slipped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. The security guard was doing his rounds on the upper floors. Alfred had memorized the schedule over the past week. He had exactly 7 minutes before the guard returned. With practiced efficiency, Alfred unrolled the poster and began hanging it in the center of the main lobby. His hand shook slightly as he smoothed out the creases, revealing the damning image inch by inch. Hope's face, frozen in ecstasy. Justin's hands, possessive and hungry. It was obscene. It was perfect. Stepping back, Alfred surveyed his handiwork. The poster dominated the space, impossible to miss. But something was missing. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a can of red spray paint. In bold, dripping letters, he wrote beneath the image, "We know what you did." The words seemed to pulse in the dim light, accusing and final. Alfred allowed himself a grim smile. Let them try to explain this away. With 2 minutes to spare, he retreated to a hidden alcove and pulled out his laptop. His fingers flew over the keys as he hacked into the station's email server. One by one, messages pinged out to every employee, from the lowliest intern to the station manager himself. The subject line read, "New art installation in the lobby, don't miss it." As he heard the elevator ding, signaling the guard's return, Alfred slipped out a side exit. The cool night air hit his face, and he took a deep breath. Phase 1 complete. He drove to the hotel he'd booked near his fictional sister's house, his alibi secured. As he checked in, he made a show of looking haggard and worried, playing the part of the concerned brother to perfection. "Room service, please," he told the sympathetic desk clerk. "I've been on the road all day visiting my sick sister. I am exhausted." Once in his room, Alfred set up his laptop and connected to the station's security cameras. He'd planted a back door in their system weeks ago, and now it gave him a front-row seat to the chaos that was about to unfold. He settled back against the headboard, a glass of whiskey in hand. On the screen, the night guard was making his final rounds. Any minute now, he would turn the corner and come face to face with Alfred's handiwork. Alfred raised his glass in a silent toast. "Showtime," he murmured. Hope Farrell hummed to herself as she applied her lipstick, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over her head. She'd woken up to an empty bed, Alfred having left early for work, or so she thought. Her phone buzzed with a text from Justin. "Can't wait to see you at the charity event tonight. You're going to knock them dead in that new dress." Hope smiled, a mixture of excitement and guilt twisting in her stomach. She pushed the guilt aside, as she had been doing for months now. Alfred would never know. He was too trusting, too caught up in his own routine to notice what was happening right under his nose. As she left the house, Hope never noticed the figure watching from across the street. Alfred waited until her car had turned the corner before making his move. He entered the house, their house, with the spare key he'd never returned. For a moment, he stood in the entryway, memories washing over him. Their first night here, carrying Hope over the threshold. Christmases, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings, all tainted now. Alfred shook off the nostalgia and got to work. He moved through the rooms like a whirlwind, methodically creating chaos. He overturned drawers, scattered papers, smashed picture frames. But it wasn't random destruction. No! Every move was calculated. He focused on Hope's belongings and their shared spaces, leaving his own things largely untouched. A message hidden in the mayhem. This was about her, not him. As he worked, Alfred planted tiny cameras throughout the house. In the bedroom, the kitchen, the living room. Each one carefully hidden, ready to capture Hope's reaction when she returned home. In the study, Alfred paused. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. The words flowed easily, all the pain and betrayal of the past months pouring onto the page. When he was done, he read it over. "Hope, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know about Justin. I know about the Sunset Motel. I know about the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. Every moment, every touch, every whispered promise. I know it all. Did you think I was too stupid to notice? Too blind to see what was happening right in front of me? I may be just a simple postal worker, but I'm not a fool. I've taken what's mine. Don't bother looking for me. Don't bother trying to explain. There's nothing left to say. Goodbye. Hope. I hope it was worth it. Alfred." He folded the letter and placed it on Hope's pillow, a landmine waiting to be triggered. Before leaving, Alfred gathered up the important documents he'd need: birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. He also took a few sentimental items. His grandfather's watch, the baseball signed by his childhood hero, the photo album from their honeymoon. Let Hope wonder why these specific things were missing. As a final touch, Alfred picked up the phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, he disguised his voice, pitching it higher and adding a tremor of fear. "Please, you have to help. I just saw someone breaking into the house across the street. 1242 Maple Drive. They're still inside." He hung up before the operator could ask any questions. The police would arrive soon, adding another layer of chaos to Hope's homecoming. Alfred took one last look around the house that had been his home for 15 years. Then he walked out the door, leaving behind the wreckage of his old life. Alfred sat in the sterile environment of his local bank, his face a mask of calm as he systematically dismantled his financial life. The teller, a young woman with concerned eyes, watched as he closed account after account. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Farrell?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "That's a significant amount of money to transfer offshore." Alfred nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Quite sure," Thank you. I'm making some lifestyle changes. As the last of his and Hope's joint accounts was drained, Alfred felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd spent weeks researching offshore banking, setting up a labyrinth of transfers that would be nearly impossible to trace. Hope wouldn't see a penny of it. Next stop, the credit card companies. One by one, Alfred canceled every card they shared. He could almost hear the distant sound of Hope's wallet becoming worthless. Sitting in his car outside the bank, Alfred pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment before composing an email to his boss at the post office. Dear Dave, I regret to inform you that I must resign from my position, effective immediately. Personal circumstances have arisen that require my full attention. I apologize for the short notice and any inconvenience this may cause. Thank you for your understanding. Sincerely, Alfred Herold. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 15 years of service ended with a few taps on a screen, but it was necessary. He couldn't risk anyone at work connecting him to what was about to unfold at the radio station. Alfred's next task was perhaps the cruelest, but he felt no remorse as he sealed the envelope. Inside was a comprehensive dossier of Hope and Justin's affair, hotel receipts, email printouts, photos from the motel. On the front, in clear block letters, he'd written, Mrs. Faith Hendricks. He dropped the package in a mailbox across town, imagining the bomb it would detonate in Justin's home. Let him feel the sting of betrayal, too. As the sun began to set, Alfred drove to the long-term parking lot at the airport. He pulled into a spot near the back, away from the security cameras. From his trunk, he retrieved a suitcase he'd packed for this very purpose. He placed the suitcase on the passenger seat, making sure it was clearly visible. On top, he left a printed itinerary for a one-way flight to Bangkok, departing in 2 days. Let them chase shadows halfway around the world. His final stop was the small apartment he'd rented under the name Nick Buford. It was sparsely furnished, but it had everything he needed: a bed, a desk, and most importantly, a top-of-the-line computer setup. Alfred settled into the chair, powering up the multiple monitors. On one screen, he pulled up the feed from the hidden cameras in his and Hope's house. Another showed the security footage from the radio station. A third displayed local news sites, ready to catch any breaking stories. He leaned back, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. The pieces were all in place. Now, he just had to watch it all burn. As night fell, Alfred Farrell disappeared, and Nick Buford, a man with no past and an uncertain future, began his vigil. Hope Farrell's heels clicked against the polished floor of the WKRP radio station lobby, the sound echoing in the early morning quiet. She was running late for the charity event planning meeting, her mind still fuzzy from a night of stolen moments with Justin. As she rounded the corner, her steps faltered, then stopped completely. There, dominating the lobby wall, was a life-size poster of her and Justin locked in a passionate embrace outside the Sunset Motel. Hope's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Beneath the damning image, blood-red letters screamed, "We know what you did." "Oh my God," she whispered, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. Around her, the lobby began to fill with arriving employees. Gasps and whispers erupted as each person caught sight of the poster. Hope stood frozen, feeling dozens of eyes boring into her. "Hope, what's going on? Why is everyone—" Justin's voice cut off abruptly as he entered the lobby. His face, usually so confident and charming, drained of all color. Their eyes met across the room, panic and shame mirrored in each other's gaze. In that moment, Hope knew their carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling around them. "Farrell, Hendricks, my office now." The station manager's voice boomed through the lobby, cutting through the growing murmurs. Hope and Justin followed him in silence, feeling like condemned prisoners walking to the gallows. As the office door closed behind them, shutting out the chaos of the lobby, Hope felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. "Would either of you care to explain what the hell is going on out there?" The manager's face was purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his forehead. Hope opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? Justin, ever the smooth talker, tried to salvage the situation. Sir, I can assure you, this is all just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? The manager slammed his fist on the desk. There's a billboard-sized photo of you two going at it like rabbits in my lobby. Do you have any idea what this could do to the station? To our reputation? Hope sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. You're both suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation, the manager continued. Now get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. As they left the office, Hope's phone buzzed with a text from Alfred. Hope, something's happened at the house. You need to come home now. Hope's heart, already racing, kicked into overdrive. What else could possibly go wrong? She raced home, her mind a whirl of panic and confusion. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw police cars parked outside. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her keys. The moment she stepped inside, Hope's world tilted on its axis. The house was in shambles, drawers upended, pictures smashed. It looked like a tornado had torn through their once peaceful home. Mrs. Farrell, a police officer, approached her. We received a call about a break-in at this address. Can you tell us if anything's missing? Hope stumbled through the house in a daze, barely registering the officer's words. When she reached the bedroom, she saw it, a letter, placed neatly on her pillow amidst the chaos. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper and began to read. Alfred's words, cold and cutting, laid bare every secret, every lie. He knew. He had always known. Hope's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor, the letter clutched to her chest. As the reality of what she'd lost crashed over her, Hope began to sob, great heaving cries that shook her entire body. The police officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, their suspicions growing with each passing moment. Across town, Faith Hendricks stared at the package that had just arrived, its contents spread across her kitchen table. Photos, emails, hotel receipts, irrefutable evidence of her husband's infidelity. With a calm she didn't feel, Faith walked to the front door and changed the locks. Then she called her lawyer. When Justin arrived home that evening, he found divorce papers waiting for him on the porch. And in a small, nondescript apartment, Alfred Farrell, now Nick Buford, watched it all unfold on his bank of monitors, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. He observed the chaos he had orchestrated with a mixture of grim satisfaction and a deep, aching sadness. Cheers, Hope, he murmured, raising his glass to the screen. I hope it was worth it. Hope Farrell stood in the checkout line at the local grocery store, her cart filled with the bare necessities. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her wallet, knowing what was coming but praying for a miracle nonetheless. I'm sorry, ma'am, the cashier said, a hint of pity in her eyes. Your card's been declined. Hope felt the stares of the people in line behind her, heard their impatient sighs. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she fumbled for another card, then another, each one useless, canceled by Alfred in his meticulous destruction of their shared life. I'll have to come back, she mumbled, abandoning her cart and fleeing the store. In her car, Hope let out a strangled sob. How had it come to this? Just weeks ago, she'd had it all, a loving husband, a good job, financial security. Now it was all gone, evaporated like morning dew under the harsh light of her betrayal. Her phone buzzed. Justin. Hope considered ignoring it, but desperation won out. They needed to find Alfred, to try and salvage something from this wreckage. Any luck? She asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Justin's bitter laugh crackled through the speaker. Oh yeah, tons of luck. All bad. The PI we hired can't find a trace of Alfred. It's like he's vanished into thin air. Hope's grip tightened on the steering wheel. We have to keep looking. He's got all our money, Justin. I can't even buy groceries. You think I'm doing any better? Justin snapped. The station fired me. My wife's divorcing me. I'm sleeping on my buddy's couch. This is all your fault, you know. My fault. Hope's voice rose incredulously. It takes two to have an affair, Justin. You were just as involved as I was. Yeah, well, it wasn't my husband who went psycho and destroyed our lives, was it? The call ended abruptly, leaving Hope alone with her thoughts. She drove aimlessly, her mind racing. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. There had to be. Her phone rang again. Hope's heart leapt, hoping it was Justin calling back to apologize. Instead, she saw her mother's number on the screen. Mom, she answered hesitantly. Hope Elizabeth Farrell. Her mother's voice was ice cold. Would you care to explain why I just received an anonymous email detailing your indiscretions? Hope's blood ran cold. Mom, I can explain. Save it. Her mother cut her off. Your father and I are beyond disappointed. We raised you better than this. Until you come to your senses and beg Alfred's forgiveness, don't bother calling us. The line went dead. Hope pulled over to the side of the road, her vision blurring with tears. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. Meanwhile, in his rented apartment, Alfred, or rather, Nick Buford, leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He'd just hit send on the email to Hope's parents, another nail in the coffin of her former life. He turned his attention back to the monitors, watching Hope break down in her car through the traffic cam he'd hacked. Part of him wanted to reach out, to comfort her. But that part was quickly silenced by the memory of her betrayal. You made your bed, Hope, he murmured. Now lie in it. As the weeks turned into months, Hope and Justin's desperate search for Alfred continued to yield nothing. Their relationship, once passionate and exciting, deteriorated into a series of bitter arguments and recriminations. This is useless, Justin shouted during one particularly heated exchange. We're never going to find him. And even if we did, what then? You think he's just going to hand over the money and forgive us? Hope sank onto the worn couch in Justin's friend's apartment, where they'd both been staying. We have to keep trying, she said, her voice hollow. What else can we do? Justin ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his once handsome face haggard with stress. I don't know, Hope. I just don't know anymore. As they sat in defeated silence, neither of them aware of the hidden camera capturing their every move, transmitting it all back to the man they were so desperately seeking. 6 months after Alfred Farrell's disappearance, a new novel hit the shelves. The Postman Always Knows Twice by M.B. Fowler became an overnight sensation. Critics hailed it as a gripping tale of betrayal and revenge. Readers couldn't put it down, and talk shows clamored to interview the mysterious author. Hope Farrell stood in the local bookstore, staring at the display of novels with a mixture of disbelief and horror. The cover showed a stylized image of a man in a postal uniform, his back turned, walking away from a woman reaching out to him. It was too close to home, too familiar. With shaking hands, she picked up a copy and began to read. Page after page, her own story unfolded before her eyes. The names were changed, certain details altered, but there was no mistaking it. This was her life, her affair, her downfall, laid bare for the world to see. It can't be, she whispered, drawing curious glances from other shoppers. It can't be him. But deep down, she knew. Alfred, quiet, unassuming Alfred, had outplayed them all. Across town, Justin Hendricks was having a similar revelation. He'd been channel surfing in his dingy studio apartment when he saw a familiar face on the screen. It was Alfred, looking more confident and put together than Justin had ever seen him. So, Mr. Fowler, the talk show host was saying, your novel has struck a chord with readers everywhere. What inspired you to write it? Alfred, or M.B. Fowler, as he was now known, smiled enigmatically. Well, Barbara, I think we've all experienced betrayal in some form or another. I wanted to explore what happens when someone decides not to just lie down and take it, but to fight back. Justin fumbled for his phone, dialing Hope's number with trembling fingers. Are you seeing this? He hissed when she answered. It's Alfred. He's written a book about us. I know, Hope replied, her voice hollow. I'm holding a copy right now. As Alfred's book tour continued, his star only rose higher. He appeared on more talk shows, gave interviews to major newspapers, even hinted at a possible movie deal. With each appearance, he gained more sympathy as the wrong spouse who had turned his pain into art. Meanwhile, Hope and Justin watched their lives crumble further. They consulted lawyers about suing for defamation, but without hard evidence that the novel was about them, and with Alfred's meticulous changes to protect himself legally, they were advised it would be a losing battle. He's ruined us, Hope said dully, staring at the cease and desist letter their lawyer had received in response to their inquiries. Completely and utterly ruined us. Justin, who had been pacing the small office, suddenly whirled on her. No, Hope, you ruined us. You and your inability to keep your damn mouth shut about our affair. If you hadn't bragged to your friends, if you hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened. As they descended into yet another argument, neither noticed the small camera hidden in the potted plant in the corner of the lawyer's office, transmitting their distress to a man miles away. Alfred, now comfortably settled in a luxurious apartment paid for by his book success, watched the feed with a mix of satisfaction and unexpected melancholy. He had won. He had his revenge. So, why didn't he feel as triumphant as he'd expected? Shaking off the moment of doubt, Alfred turned his attention to his laptop. He had charitable donations to make, anonymously, of course. Let the town see how their once-beloved radio personality and his mistress had fallen, while a mysterious benefactor supported local causes. It was the perfect final touch to his plan, the ultimate victory. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered her verdict. Hope sat rigid in her chair, her once stylish clothes now worn and shabby. Across the aisle, Alfred, looking every inch the successful author in a tailored suit, listened impassively. In the matter of Farrell versus Farrell, the judge began, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Alfred Farrell. Given the evidence presented of Mrs. Farrell's infidelity and Mr. Farrell's significant contributions to the marriage, the division of assets will be as follows. Hope barely heard the rest. It was over. Alfred had won, again. The careful documentation of her affair, the financial records showing how he'd supported her through graduate school, the character witnesses attesting to his upstanding nature and her recent erratic behavior. It had all added up to this moment. As the court adjourned, Hope watched Alfred stride confidently out of the room. He didn't even glance in her direction. She was nothing to him now. Less than nothing. Weeks later, Hope sat at her small kitchen table, pen hovering over a blank sheet of paper. She'd lost everything. Her job, her reputation, her family's support. Alfred's book was still topping the bestseller list, a constant reminder of her shame. In desperation, she decided to make one last appeal. Dear Alfred, she wrote, her handwriting shaky. I know I have no right to contact you, no right to ask for anything, but I'm begging you, please. Can we talk? I know what I did was unforgivable, but I never meant to hurt you. I never stopped loving you. Please, Alfred, I have nothing left. No one left. You're my only hope. She sealed the letter with tears in her eyes, clinging to a shred of hope that somewhere, deep down, Alfred still cared. 3 days later, a large manila envelope arrived at Hope's apartment. Her heart leapt. Had Alfred read her letter? Was this a response? But as she tore it open, her hope turned to ashes. Inside was a formal cease and desist order, threatening legal action if she attempted to contact Alfred again. It was signed by his lawyer, not even by Alfred himself. Hope sank to the floor, the papers scattered around her. It was truly, finally over. Across town, Justin Hendricks packed the last of his meager belongings into a battered suitcase. The town that had once adored him now shunned him at every turn. No one would hire him, not even for the most menial jobs. Every stranger's glance felt accusing. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about him. He couldn't take it anymore. With no destination in mind, Justin tossed his suitcase into his car, the one possession he'd managed to keep, and drove away from the town that had been his home for so long. He didn't look back. Meanwhile, Alfred Farrell stood in the local animal shelter, surrounded by the barks and meows of abandoned pets. He'd started volunteering here a few weeks ago, finding an unexpected solace in caring for these forgotten creatures. As he walked down the row of kennels, a pair of soulful brown eyes caught his attention. A mixed-breed dog, probably part lab, part who knows what, watched him cautiously. The sign on the kennel read Max, 3 years old, abandoned. Something in the dog's wary gaze struck a chord in Alfred. Here was another being who had been betrayed, left behind by those who should have cared for him. "Hey there, Max," Alfred said softly, crouching down. "How about we start over together?" Max's tail gave a tentative wag, and as Alfred filled out the adoption papers, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to trust again, to love again. It wouldn't be easy. The pain of Hope's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in his chest. But as he clipped a leash onto Max's collar and led him out of the shelter, Alfred felt the first stirrings of a new chapter beginning. "Come on, boy," he said, scratching Max behind the ears. "Let's go home." As they walked out into the sunlight, Alfred Farrell, author, divorced, and now dog owner, took his first step towards a future unburdened by the weight of betrayal and revenge. Max trotted alongside him, his paws padding softly on the sidewalk. For a moment, Alfred allowed himself to imagine a life filled with simple pleasures, long walks in the park, quiet evenings by the fireplace, the unconditional love of a loyal companion. But as they reached Alfred's car, a flicker of movement across the street caught his eye. There, half hidden behind a parked van, stood Hope. Her once perfect hair was limp and unkempt, her designer clothes replaced by a shabby sweater and jeans. Their eyes met for a brief, electric moment. Alfred felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, a ghost of the love he'd once felt. For a heartbeat, he considered crossing the street, speaking to her, offering what? Forgiveness? A second chance? Max whined softly, drawing Alfred's attention back to the present. He looked down at the dog, then back up at Hope. She took a hesitant step forward, hope blooming in her eyes. Alfred shook his head once, firmly. Then he opened the car door, helped Max inside, and drove away without looking back. As the shelter receded in his rearview mirror, Alfred felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The chapter of his life that included Hope was over. He had exacted his revenge, written his story, and now it was time to move on. He glanced at Max, who was watching the world go by with eager curiosity. "Well, boy," Alfred said, reaching over to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Looks like it's just you and me now. Ready for a new adventure." Max's tail thumped against the seat in response. As they drove home, Alfred's mind wandered to his next book project. Perhaps a lighter tale this time, something about new beginnings and second chances. He had a feeling he'd have plenty of inspiration. The sun was setting as Alfred pulled into his driveway, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of his new home. A modest but comfortable house bought with the proceeds from his bestseller. As he and Max walked up the path, Alfred felt a sense of peace settle over him. Inside, he unclipped Max's leash and watched as the dog cautiously explored his new surroundings. Alfred moved through the house, turning on lights and shedding the persona of M.B. Fowler, successful author, like an old coat. In his study, he paused before the wall of framed clippings, reviews of his book, photos from his talk show appearances, the New York Times bestseller list with his name at the top, mementos of his triumph, his revenge. For a moment, he considered taking them down. But no, they were part of his story now, a reminder of how far he'd come and what he'd overcome. Max padded into the room, pressing against Alfred's leg. Alfred looked down at the dog, then back at the wall of memories. "You know what, Max?" he said softly. "I think we both deserve a fresh start." He reached out and straightened one of the frames, a small smile playing on his lips. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define his future. As the night deepened, Alfred settled into his favorite armchair, a notebook open on his lap. Max curled up at his feet, a warm, comforting presence. The house was quiet save for the scratch of pen on paper and the occasional contented sigh from the dog. Alfred wrote late into the night, pouring out ideas for his new novel. But this time, instead of a tale of betrayal and revenge, he found himself writing about redemption, about the healing power of unexpected connections. As he finally set down his pen and prepared for bed, Alfred realized he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: excitement for the future. He had survived the storm of betrayal, navigated the turbulent waters of revenge, and now found himself on the shores of a new beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. But for now, as he drifted off to sleep with Max, snoring softly beside the bed, Alfred Farrell was content. The story of the betrayed postal worker was over. The story of Alfred Farrell, author and dog owner, was just beginning. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
It's been a long time since that incident, and I haven't really shared it with anyone in my life now. Tonight, with a good bottle of wine in hand, I feel like letting my fingers do the talking. Back then, I thought I had found the perfect woman. We met during our last year of college at a party, and there was an instant connection. She was a stunning blonde with a beautiful tan. Someone who could easily have been a model, like Kate Upton. She had all these incredible qualities: kind, compassionate, a great listener, and had an active social life with lots of friends. Our friend groups meshed effortlessly over the 3 years we knew each other, and some of our friends even ended up dating. Those were some of the best times of my life. At the time, I was pursuing a post-grad degree in finance while she had a degree in contractual law. We both ended up succeeding in our respective fields, but let me tell you, I wasn't too shabby in the looks department either. I'm 5 feet 11 inches and weighed about 190 pounds. I enjoyed going to the gym and staying fit. I may not have been a super athlete, but I had a solid physique. Still, despite my appearance, I was always pretty shy and hadn't been in many relationships before meeting her. We were completely smitten from the very first time we met. We spent the entire night talking, and from then on, we couldn't get enough of each other. We started texting, calling every day, and going on weekly dates. About a year later, after I landed my new job, she moved in with me. Her family was amazing, and I especially got along well with her mother, although her father was a bit distant with everyone. It was a whirlwind romance, filled with incredible overseas vacations, hiking trips, and luxurious getaways. After 2.5 wonderful years, I decided to propose to her, and she said yes. I was on cloud 9. She took the reins with all the wedding planning, and we began dreaming about our future together. Buying a house, having kids, going on unforgettable family vacations. We were excited about all the amazing things ahead of us. And then, it happened one evening. When we both got home to our apartment, I immediately noticed that she was acting a bit distant. It struck me right away because we had always been very affectionate with each other. At first, this happened maybe once a week for the first month after the proposal, but it started occurring more frequently. I probably wouldn't have thought much of it, except that I had spent a lot of time listening to Reddit stories on YouTube, so I decided to wait and observe. These moments of her pulling away would only last a couple of hours, and then she'd go back to being her usual self. However, after 6 months, with the wedding planned for a year later, her behavior became more frequent, happening almost every night. Our sex life was still great, and my relationship with her parents remained strong. But during Thanksgiving, when we were at her parents' house in Louisville, Kentucky, while we lived just north of D.C., she was distant and standoffish towards me in front of her mother. Her mom, being very observant, noticed this and pulled her aside for a private talk. I could hear them arguing in hushed voices, and after a few intense moments, they rejoined the rest of the family as if nothing had happened. I figured I could ask her about it later, so I did, but she didn't want to talk about it. She asked me to wait until we got home to discuss it. I agreed because I loved her deeply and believed we could work through anything. Her mom looked just like her but older, same stunning appearance, only with a few gray hairs and long, thick blonde hair. This detail becomes important later. When we got home, I brought it up again, but she still didn't want to talk about it. After pushing her for a week, She finally admitted that a guy at her job had been trying to get closer to her. She wanted to be honest, so she showed me her phone. As I looked through it, I noticed that all the texts from the times when she had been distant had been deleted. There was nothing suspicious in the remaining texts, but I did go into her phone settings and turned on the location tracker since we had the same phone plan. Honestly, I thought it would reassure me that she wasn't doing anything wrong. Well, I was mistaken. On the second weekend after Thanksgiving, she had a company Christmas party. I had planned to go with her, but I was hit with food poisoning and had to cancel. Her friend came to pick her up from our apartment that night since they had planned for a wild night out, and the designated driver would take care of everything. I told her to have a great time and that I'd see her in the morning. So, there I was, miserably sick, barely able to leave the toilet for more than 30 minutes. Despite feeling awful, I grabbed my phone to track her location. At first, she was at a restaurant, then at the party venue, and later at a bar. None of this raised any concerns until I saw her phone stop at a downtown hotel. At that point, I felt terrible on multiple levels. Physically, I was projectile vomiting from both ends, and emotionally, I was drained. Exhaustion eventually took over, and I fell asleep around 2 a.m. When I woke up at 7 a.m., I saw that she was still at the hotel. Around noon, she finally came back home, and I was feeling better. She showered me with affection, and I casually brought up the previous night, without mentioning that I knew her whereabouts. She told me about the restaurant, the party, and the bar, but then claimed she went to her friend's place to crash for the night. That was the first lie. Over the next 3 months, she started working later and later, 3 to 4 days a week. When I questioned her about it, she became increasingly defensive. One evening, when my fiancé didn't come home until late, I spoke with her mom. I asked about their Thanksgiving conversation, and she confessed that she suspected her daughter might be cheating based on her body language. Her mom also mentioned that their weekly texts had become more distant and less frequent. With all these thoughts and suspicions swirling in my head, I decided to keep them to myself. 2 weeks later, something changed at work. I was assigned a new project that required me to fly to the Midwest every week from Monday to Friday for the next 5 weeks, starting in 2 weeks. It also came with a salary increase. When I shared the news with my fiancée, she seemed genuinely happy for me. Little did I know, her excitement might not have been for the same reasons as mine. So, I went online and bought 4 motion-activated spy cameras for our apartment. I placed one in the living room entry area, one in the kitchen, one in our bedroom, and one overlooking the hallway. These cameras were small and connected to a hidden internet network, making them undetectable on our regular Wi-Fi. I set up a password to secure them and just waited, keeping a close eye. During my first week away, she had her girlfriends over for 2 nights and never worked late. However, on the 3rd night, a guy came over, and that made me furious. I was sitting in my hotel room, screaming at the screen and hurling every insult I could think of. They went all the way, first on the couch, then in our bed. She contorted herself in ways I didn't even know were possible. The worst part was when I called her while watching them, and she heard her phone ring. She signaled him to pause, answered the call, and when I asked why she was out of breath, she claimed she was at the gym working out. As soon as the call ended, she went right back to it. When I finally returned home on Friday evening, I ignored her and went straight to bed. On Saturday morning, I went cycling, not even realizing how far I was going. I was so upset that I ended up biking over 50 miles from our apartment. My longest ride before that had been just 30 miles, but that day I pushed myself to 105.6 miles. When I finally returned, completely exhausted, I took a shower. Later that evening, she and I went out with our friends, had a good time, and consumed a fair amount of alcohol. Was it considered breaking up when the person you're about to leave has no idea? I was overwhelmed by a storm of heartbreak, anger, rage, and betrayal. It hurt so much because I had loved her deeply. It was hard to believe that someone who had once been so attentive was now completely unaware of what I was going through. Finally, I opened up to one of our mutual friends, and to my shock, he revealed that they had all known about the situation for months. I couldn't believe it. Everyone knew, but nobody said a word to me. That's why our invitations to hang out with them had started dwindling. Looking back, I realized that about 3 months earlier, the invites became fewer and fewer for me. So, I decided to make an effort to win her back. The following weekend, I planned an entire weekend of spoiling her in every possible way. We went out for fancy dinners, indulged in pampering massages, and had heartfelt conversations about our future and my deep love for her. I could tell I was making progress when, after her 4th glass of wine, she started to cry. It became clear that the guilt was finally surfacing. I asked her what was bothering her, but every time she tried to speak, She became choked up. I reassured her that if there was something in her past or any conflict on her mind, I was more than willing to listen. If forgiveness was needed, I was ready to forgive and move forward. The only words she managed to say were how much she loved me, which stung deeply, especially since I had 4 separate videos of her and another man being intimate in our apartment during the 8 weeks of my trips to the Midwest. Those trips ended up lasting 10 weeks in total, and over that time, I recorded over 41 hours of footage of her and the man, who I later found out was her coworker. Interestingly, she never had to work late once while I was away. Every weekend, I made a conscious effort to be extra attentive to her, but with each passing week, she became more distant. After witnessing this for 8 weeks, I reached my breaking point and devised a 12-step plan to break free. The first step was to gather evidence of her behavior. The second step was to get her out of the way so I could execute the rest of my plan. I came up with the idea of a 2-week getaway to an all-inclusive resort in Barbados for us. She was thrilled about it, but a week before the trip, I told her I couldn't go and suggested she take a friend instead. I knew it was over when she showed no disappointment at my cancellation. Little did she know, I had already arranged for her coworker to accompany her on the trip. The next step was to terminate our apartment lease, which conveniently expired 3 days into her trip. Since I was the sole signer on the lease, I was in control of that. I also needed to find a job in another town, and luckily, the company I had been helping in the Midwest offered me a position with a slight salary increase. I also found a new place to live in the area I had planned to move to. While she was away, here's what I planned to do. Take her to the airport, then return home to pack all her belongings. On the same Saturday, I'd get a new phone number, change my phone and email, and cancel all my social media accounts. On Monday, I'd completely separate our finances by withdrawing all the money from our joint accounts, closing them, and putting her share in an envelope with her things. I would then arrange for movers to pack up all my belongings and have them shipped out west. Afterward, I would take all her things to her mother's house, which was about 600 miles away. Thankfully, everything she owned fit in the back and bed of my F-250 crew cab. From Tuesday to Saturday, I would give the evidence to her mother and begin my new life. I wanted to ensure I didn't do anything illegal, so I made sure that nothing of hers went missing. Packing up all her belongings neatly was incredibly difficult, and it was the hardest I've ever cried. I'd read countless stories on Reddit about people being promised change after being caught, but it rarely happened. My hope was that she would genuinely confess so we could forgive each other and move forward, but she never did. She came close on 2 occasions, but the secret she was hiding was too difficult for her to reveal. On Tuesday morning, I left our apartment north of DC for the last time. It took me 10 hours to reach her mother's house. When I arrived, I was caught off guard by what happened next. I showed up unannounced, hoping to surprise her. Since they lived in a gated community, I had to buzz her house from the front gate. As I drove up, I saw her waiting for me outside. The moment I approached her, I could tell she had been crying. I asked what was wrong, and she hugged me, sobbing. She told me she suspected her husband was cheating on her with a younger, slimmer, and more attractive woman. I was completely stunned, so I just held her for about 10 minutes while her tears soaked my shoulder. Once she composed herself, I asked if we could go inside to talk. We went inside, and I asked where her husband was. She mentioned that he claimed to be going fishing with friends at a remote cabin an hour away, but added that he hated fishing. She shared all the signs she had picked up on, and it seemed like this had been going on for about a year. We did some research and found a credit card charge for a luxurious 5-star hotel just 20 minutes away. A quick phone call confirmed that her husband was indeed there, having a 4-night rendezvous with his mistress. I responded, 2 peas in a pod, and explained that her husband was cheating on her, and my daughter was cheating on me. That's why I came to drop off her belongings and move out. I showed her the evidence I had compiled in a binder, with screen captures of everything. After flipping through the first few pages, she looked at me in disbelief. We embraced and cried for about 30 minutes. Then, she told me to stop crying and suggested we drown our sorrows by drinking 3 bottles of Moscato and fooling around in every room of the house. She grabbed 2 wine glasses and a bottle of Moscato and headed out to their private pool deck. She asked if I was joining her outside or if I was planning to seek revenge. I won't go into too much detail, but for that night and the next 3 days, we were inseparable. We shared a passionate connection, exploring every part of her, and it felt like we reached new heights together at least 25 times during that period. Once those days came to an end, we parted ways with a passionate farewell, and I drove off to my new destination. She kept me updated on everything that happened after. The day my ex-fiancé returned was unforgettable. I had canceled my phone that morning, so when she landed and tried to reach me, it showed that my number was disconnected. She ended up having her lover give her a ride home. He dropped her off and left, and when she arrived at the door, she was greeted by a couple she didn't recognize, new tenants. She was in shock and tried calling me multiple times, but since my phone was no longer active, she couldn't reach me. She ended up staying with some girlfriends, as her coworker, who was married, wasn't able to help her. In her panic, she called her mom, who told her I had come down and delivered all her belongings, including her money, which was now 600 miles away. Her mom didn't mention that she'd spent more time with me in those 3 days than we had in the last 6 months, but she did share that she knew about the affair and that I had moved on. New job, new place, new life, and no longer living near her or our so-called friends. Her mom also told her that she was separating from her father due to infidelity, which seemed to shake her. My ex-fiancée cried for days and took a week off from work, but unfortunately, she sought comfort in the arms of her married lover. Her mom never told her where I was, and I completely severed ties with that chapter of my life. The only remaining connection I had to it was through her mother, and to this day, she has kept our secret. My ex-fiancée was ghosted, big time. The timing of everything that allowed me to leave my ex-fiancée was incredibly fortunate. The lease ending, finding a new job, and my phone plan coming to an end all happened at just the right moment. If any of these events had occurred differently, the outcome could have been much different. Now, after the fact, my ex-fiancée's mother and I stayed in touch for several months. We had both experienced the loss of our relationships and found ourselves seeking a form of revenge against our respective partners. However, neither of our partners ever learned what transpired between us. 7 months after I had settled into my new location, my ex-fiancée's mother came to visit me. I want to clarify, much to the disappointment of many, that we only talked. We both regretted what had happened between us, acknowledging that it was driven by the intensity of the past and the moment. Many intense moments, to be specific. She told me that her daughter knew where I was and was upset that she hadn't revealed my location. She asked if she could tell my ex-fiancé where I was and provide a way for her to contact me, but I requested that she refrain from doing so, as I had moved on to my new life. We had lengthy conversations about the possibility of her reconciling with her husband. She shared that he was deeply remorseful, admitting everything he had done. His confession was overwhelming for her, and she asked how he planned to rebuild her trust. In an effort to be transparent, he provided all his digital passwords and allowed her to see every hurtful action he had taken in their marriage. Though she was filled with anger, she acknowledged his genuine efforts to repair their relationship. She mentioned that forgiveness would take time, but rebuilding trust would take even more. What brought him back to reality was when she confronted him about the affair and showed him evidence of what their daughter had done to me. I should also mention that my ex-fiancée's mother was an extraordinary woman in every way. She made it clear that if he ever strayed again, she would reserve the right to do the same. When he asked her to clarify, she revealed that as soon as she found out about his infidelity, she had a fling with the first eligible man she came across. This revelation devastated him. They both cried a lot and decided to separate temporarily to give each other time to think and determine whether they wanted to fight for their marriage. Eventually, my ex-fiancée's parents sought marriage counseling, and as of May 2020, they are still together. As for my ex-fiancée, she was devastated by what had happened when she finally went to her parents' house to collect her belongings. There, she was confronted with evidence of the affair, which left her feeling humiliated. My ex-fiancée's mother had to remove some inappropriate pictures from the binder to spare her father from seeing them. Regardless, my ex was crushed by the situation. It wasn't until months later that she discovered her mother had my contact information. She begged her mother for it, which caused a significant strain between them. However, her mother warned her that if she tried to find me or contact me, I would release all the evidence publicly on the internet. This insistence from my ex-fiancée to get in touch with me ultimately led her to come see me. She was also upset about the struggles her parents were facing in their marriage. According to her, she was depressed for several months and sought counseling to cope with it. When she returned from her parents' place in Louisville, Kentucky, she ended the affair with her coworker and began looking for a new job. In December 2019, I learned that she had gotten married and now has 2 beautiful twin daughters with a good man. According to her mother, she still lives in the D.C. area and works from home, enjoying her new life. I'm glad she was able to turn things around and find happiness again. I recently decided to get rid of all the incriminating evidence I had on my ex-fiancée because I didn't want to be the type of person who holds someone hostage for the rest of their life. I asked her mother to pass along a message to my ex-fiancée. If I were in her shoes and received such bombshell information, it would have caused me sleepless nights. As for me, I'm content with my current life. Ex-fiancé's mother and I kept in touch every few months at first, but now we only talk once or maybe twice a year, usually just a short message with updates on our lives. The one question that still remains unanswered for me is whether my ex-fiancée and I could have repaired our relationship if her parents were able to repair theirs, but I never gave it a chance. I can only speculate. Our lives have since moved in vastly different directions. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Growing up, I always felt like life was steady and predictable. I had my routines, my home, and the things that made me feel secure. I valued that predictability until one night when my world changed in an unexpected way. It wasn't anything major, just a small disruption, but it marked the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself. It started with a simple sound. The clattering of a trash bin knocked over in the middle of the night startled me awake. I was already annoyed this had happened before. I figured it was the stray dogs again, but little did I know that this minor disturbance would lead me to meet two people who would disrupt my quiet life in unimaginable ways. I groggily made my way to the back door, club in hand, irritated by the all-too-familiar mess outside. For the third time that week, I'd been woken up by the sound of trash cans being knocked over. I was fed up with cleaning up someone else's problem. Why couldn't people keep their pets under control? While I understood the animals were probably hungry, it didn't ease my frustration. I cautiously opened the gate, ready to deal with the nuisance. As I neared the overturned garbage, I saw two shadowy figures standing by the mess, and my grip on the club tightened as they noticed me. "Please, sir, we're just hungry," one of them said. "We'll clean everything up. Don't hurt us." These weren't dogs. They were children, but they certainly seemed wild. It was dark, so I grabbed them by their collars and dragged them into the backyard under the security lights. I picked them up to get a better look. They were scruffy and dirty, dressed in oversized, ragged clothes and baseball caps. It was cold out, and I saw them shivering. "Did you two knock over my trash earlier this week?" I asked. They exchanged glances. "Yeah, you always throw out something like pizza or food," one of them replied. "I'm sorry we did this. We won't do it again. Just let us go. We'll clean everything up." "This won't do." I gripped their shirts tightly and led them inside. I brought them straight to the bathroom, pushed them in, and shut the door. "Don't come out until I'm back," I said. I went and grabbed some of my ex-wife's sweatpants, sweatshirts, clean socks, and big fluffy towels. When I returned, they had tried to open the window to escape. "You might like being dirty," I said, "but I doubt a hot shower will hurt you. There's soap and shampoo here. These are clean clothes and towels. Get undressed and get in the shower." "We don't like being dirty," the larger one growled. "We just don't have a shower as nice as yours." "Are you going to stand there the whole time? You probably think we'll steal something," I said. "Yeah, right," the kid snapped. "We're not going to steal your toilet paper. We're not thieves. What, are you some kind of creep, you into little girls?" I was shocked. Now that I looked closer, beneath all that dirt, they were definitely girls. I didn't realize you were girls. Just clean yourselves up and I'll get you something to eat. Come to the kitchen when you're done." I left them in the bathroom and headed to the kitchen. I opened the fridge and took stock. There was cold fried chicken, half a bowl of potato salad, a tray of veggies, some sandwich pastrami, and dill pickles. I split the chicken between two plates, 3 pieces each, and added a big scoop of potato salad. I put some veggies on a plate with dip, threw a few pickles on the side, and made pastrami sandwiches for each of them. I even added some chips for good measure. Hopefully, they'd like the Munster cheese, mayo, and mustard on their sandwiches. I heard the bathroom door creak open, followed by hushed whispers outside the kitchen. A minute later, 2 of the most beautiful girls I'd ever seen stepped into the room. They had long, jet-black hair, olive skin, and the brightest green, almond-shaped eyes I'd ever seen, along with high cheekbones and the cutest little noses. They looked like they were still in their early teens, maybe around 11 or 12. It was amusing to see them in Brianna's clothes. She's tall, and they were tiny, with their sleeves and pant legs rolled up, looking a bit like tramps. "Have a seat," I said, offering them a chair. "Do you want Coca-Cola, or I have juice or milk?" They both asked for milk. "My name is McKay North," I said as I poured the milk and placed it in front of them. "What are your names?" "My name's Maggie," said the older one, short for Margaret. "This is Stokely." "Can we really eat all this?" she asked. "You can have more if you want sandwiches," I replied. "But I'm not cooking at 2 a.m. I'll make something in the morning." No, this is great, thank you, Stokely said, while Maggie eyed me warily. What do you want from us? We don't do any dirty stuff, Maggie said suspiciously. I laughed. Neither do I. If either of you had designs on my virtue, you'd be disappointed. They didn't seem to get my humor. I'm not into little girls, I added. They didn't like being called little girls, but they started eating, and fast, like wolves. Hey, slow down, I told them. The chickens aren't going anywhere. They're dead, and the potatoes were never fast. You'll hurt your stomach. This made them giggle, and they started eating more slowly. Where do you two live? I asked. There's an empty house at the end of the block, Maggie answered. We found a mattress and some blankets, but we're afraid pill dependents might move in. Once they know it's empty, they will... How about sleeping in a warm, clean bed tonight? I offered. They looked at me suspiciously again. Not mine, I laughed. I have 3 extra bedrooms. Well, they're mine too, but you know what I mean. They laughed nervously. We don't have any money, Stokely said. We can't pay you. We just collect cans, but we spend all our money on food. I'm not asking for money, I said. Did I say anything about you paying me? Why are you doing this? She asked. Why are you so kind to us, Mac? Call me Mac, I said. Everyone does. Why are you being so nice, Mac? Maggie pressed. I'm not trying to be cute, I told her. I'm a good guy. Just ask my mom. This brought smiles to their faces, and I liked it. I made a mental note to get them to smile more often. If I were in your shoes, I'd want someone to be kind to me, I said. They seemed to be thinking it over. Can I have some of these chips? Stokely asked. I pushed the bag toward them, and they both reached in while continuing to eat their sandwiches. I finished my own and noticed they were still hungry, so I poured them more milk. They drank it all and cleaned their plates, even the vegetables. They must have been starving. Go to bed, I told them. Each of you has your own bathroom. There are toothbrushes, combs, and other things like that. Aspirin, stomach medicine, toothpaste, and dental floss are in the first aid kits. If you need anything else, just ask. Can we lock the doors? Maggie asked. Yes, but if I knock, you have to open them within a reasonable time, I said. They exchanged a glance. Then Maggie's green eyes lit up. He thinks we'll steal something, she told Stokely. Don't worry, Mac, we won't take anything. It's okay if you don't trust us. We don't really trust you either. I had to laugh. Fair enough. We have mutual distrust. But you'll soon learn you can trust me. I almost never hurt beautiful girls. This brought another set of dazzling smiles. They followed me down the hallway to their rooms. I heard the locks click and smiled to myself. As I returned to bed, I lay awake for a while wondering what had happened to these girls. Why were they digging through my trash? Why were they alone? Where was their family? I planned to get some answers in the morning. I was getting dressed when I heard the floorboards creaking in the hall. I cracked the door open and saw them sneaking toward the living room. I figured they were about to leave, so I stepped out. They froze. Girls, are you ready for breakfast? I asked. They looked at each other. Maybe we should just leave, Maggie said. You're not going to lock us up or anything, are you? You mean make you stay? I asked. They glanced at each other again and nodded. No, I won't force you to stay, I said. That's not how I do things. But I'd love for you to have breakfast with me. They looked at each other once more. Will you let us go after? Stokely asked. If that's what you want, I said. Though I was hoping you'd spend the day with me. But if you have somewhere else to be, that's okay. Yeah, we've got to meet our stockbroker, Maggie quipped, her face lighting up like a Christmas tree. So, what's for breakfast? No, what are you going to feed us? She corrected herself. Are you an English teacher or something? Actually, yes, I said. I teach English literature at the university. Cool, Stokely said. We don't go to school. Too busy. But you're having breakfast, right? I was thinking waffles and bacon. Sound good? It did. So we headed to the kitchen. They got out the waffle iron while I mixed the batter, and they made waffles while I fried 2 pounds of bacon. I'm kind of a syrup snob. I'm a coffee snob, too. I let Maggie turn the bacon while I ground the coffee beans. Everything came together nicely, and we had real maple syrup and waffles. They horrified me by asking for coffee creamer, but I kept some around for the barbarians and Brianna, and they loved the vanilla flavor. We ate all the bacon, and they each had 3 waffles. Stick with me, girls, and in a week you'll be as fat as toads, I joked. They laughed, and it was the best sound I'd ever heard. Then they gulped down milk like hungry calves. My pantry was definitely going to need restocking. So, tell me about Maggie and Stokely, I asked. What's going on with you two? Why are you digging through people's trash for food? We took our coffee into the living room and they shared their sad story. Their father had been a car mechanic. He lost his job when they were young, which led him to start drinking and abusing them. Their mother eventually divorced him and they never saw him again. The economy in Detroit was falling apart, making it hard to find work. Their mom drove a taxi to support them, but one night she picked up the wrong passenger. He stabbed her for the little money she had and left her to bleed to end of life. The girls were put into foster care, but the foster homeowner began maltreating them. They ran away and lived on the streets for 3 months. Their last name was Steele, and they constantly worried about freezing to end of life, being maltreated or eliminated, and where their next meal would come from. I sat quietly after they finished their story. My heart broke for them. I wondered how many more kids like them were out there, living the same story. This was probably more common than I had ever realized. I wondered if they'd let me help them, and how I even could. It seemed unlikely that Children's Services would let them stay with me. A single man housing 2 young girls? It sounded like something a carnivore would dream up, and I doubted social services would allow it. They interrupted my thoughts. "Mac, are you married?" Stokely asked. "I was," I replied, "but my ex thought I wasn't ambitious enough. She's a hotshot lawyer and has been all over. There was no room for marriage in her life." "What a witch," Maggie commented. I laughed. "She's actually a really good person. She didn't cheat or anything, and we're still close friends. We both agreed we should never have gotten married. We were too young and too dumb." "How old are you?" Stokely asked. "I'm 28, I told her. "How old are you?" "I'm 11, and she's 13, Stokely answered. "What are you doing today?" I asked. "What are we doing today?" She corrected herself. "Yes, what you said." "We're going to talk," I said, "and I'll introduce you to someone." I opened the garage door, and suddenly a mass of fur came bounding in. He spotted our guests and leaped onto the sofa, settling on their laps and licking them with his big pink tongue. "This is Granville," I said, "but I call him Grandma." The girls burst into giggles as the dog covered them with licks. At 130 pounds, they could barely move him. "Lie down, Grandma," I commanded, and he reluctantly settled on their legs. "He's huge," Stokely laughed, stroking his head. "What kind of dog is this? He's striped like a tiger." "He's a bull mastiff," I explained. "That's why he has that brindle color." "He looks like he could bite our faces off," Maggie said. "Yes, he could, but he won't. He's gentle with my friends. He sees you here being kind, so he loves you. If you were threatening, he'd get aggressive. Now that he knows you, he won't let anyone be mean to you. If I yell at you, he won't like it. He protects the people he cares about." Stokely slid down and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck as he licked her hand. "I love him," she said. "He's so wrinkly and cute." "Does he live in the garage?" she asked. "No, he lives in the house," I replied. "He got sick yesterday, so I put him outside to avoid a mess." "What made him sick?" Stokely asked. "He eats things he shouldn't. Sticks, bugs, dead stuff." "You name it. He seems fine now, though." "Gross," Maggie said. "He licked my face." "Yeah, he's a bit disgusting, but he's my buddy. He'll be your buddy too if you let him. We should take him for a walk." I grabbed his leash, and Maggie wanted to lead him. But really the dog led her, dragging her a few yards ahead of Stokely and me. Stokely slipped her small hand into mine, and I looked down at her. She smiled up at me. She was so beautiful. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "I like holding hands with pretty girls." She blushed a little, but didn't let go. We walked for a couple of miles, and by the time we got back, Granville was panting and drooling. It was cold out, but he didn't seem to care. We drank more coffee and talked for the rest of the day. Eventually, I asked them if they'd let me help them. "What can you do?" Maggie asked. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but I could talk to Brianna. She's a lawyer, though a different kind. Maybe she'll have some ideas." "Is this the same witch?" Maggie asked. "Maggie, stop calling her that. She's not a witch. Do you trust me?" I asked. They exchanged looks and nodded. "Yeah, I guess," Stokely said. "You've been really kind to us." "Okay, let's call her and see if she can come over. I think you'll like her. Just give her a chance." Brianna was busy, but agreed to come over for dinner. Bri is a tall, stunning redhead, and even though she doesn't realize it, she's incredibly sexy. When she walked in, I could tell the girls were impressed. She kissed me until my toes curled, then hugged both girls. "You've replaced me?" she teased, winking at them. "No, Bri, you're irreplaceable," I joked. She beamed, clearly pleased. I explained to the girls that Bree and I were still good friends, and we were. We had a friends with benefits kind of relationship. We still had great sex, sometimes once a week, sometimes more. Occasionally, she'd stay with me for a week and we'd have sex like rabbits. But she didn't have time for a husband, and I doubted she ever would. We loved each other, but we couldn't make marriage work. As friends, we were great, but as a married couple, we fought constantly. "So, who are your new girlfriends?" she asked, smiling at them. I saw they were dazzled. "I'm Maggie, and this is Stokely." "Nice to meet you," Bree said. "You know this guy's dangerous, right?" "Not to us," Stokely said. "But he could be to someone who's his enemy. He has a club, and a very big dog." Bree nudged Granville with her boot, and he grumbled in his sleep. "Hey, big guy." She knelt down and hugged him. "Miss me?" He rolled his eyes but didn't have the energy to lift his head. "What's going on, Mac?" she asked. "What did you need to talk about? Not that I mind coming over for dinner. He's a great cook, girls, if you can get him motivated." "I think he made lamb chops," Maggie said. "We've never had anything like this before." "Well, sounds like I'm in for a treat, but seriously, what's the big deal?" she asked again. "During dinner," I explained. "We need your help, Bree," I said. "We don't know anything about legal stuff. The girls are orphans. Their dad might be alive, but no one knows where he is. He abandoned them and their mom was eliminated. They ended up in foster care where some creep started maltreating them. They ran away and have been living on the streets. I found them digging through my trash, and now we're trying to figure out how to keep them from going back to that life." She looked at me for a moment. "You want them, don't you?" she said, exhaling. "Jesus, Mac, you've always wanted kids. And because I didn't give you any, you want them, don't you?" I blushed. "Yeah, I kind of do. What do you think, Bree? What's the best way to handle this?" "I don't think it's possible," she said. "No family court is going to give you 2 young girls. You're a single guy. It's a disaster waiting to happen. They won't allow it." I looked at the girls, and their wide eyes were on me. "What?" I asked. They exchanged glances and suddenly burst into tears, running up to hug me. "You wanted to keep us?" Stokely sobbed. "I can't believe it. I never thought we'd find anyone. Anyone." She couldn't finish through the tears. I held them tight. "Yes, girls, I did think about it. You need someone to look after you, and I need someone to look after me. I thought we could figure this out together." Their small bodies trembled as they clung to me. I looked at Bree, helpless, as tears streamed down her face. She glanced from the girls to me. "Damn it, Mac. Look what you've done to me. Just when I think I've got you figured out, you surprise me. What am I going to do with you?" She had a strange expression, like she was seeing me in a new light. "Give me a few days to think. Girls, you're coming with me. You can't stay here with Mac. It'll ruin everything if anyone finds out. Mac, we're taking Grandma too. I can't stay home without him, and you'll have to look after the girls." She whisked them and the dog out the door like a whirlwind and into her Mercedes. "I'll call you," she said. Over the next 2 weeks, she called me for about 30 seconds 3 times, but I didn't see her or the girls. Then on a Friday morning, she called and asked to meet for dinner at Alfonso's, a little Italian place in Pontiac that we frequented. When I arrived, she was already at the bar, with guys hovering around her. The moment she saw me, she jumped up, leaving them in the dust. We walked to our usual booth, but this time she sat next to me instead of across the table, which was unusual. We ordered, and she stayed quiet for a bit. Finally, she said, "You know I love you, right, Mac?" "Yes, and I love you too," I replied. "I'm not talking about loving your mom or anything like that. I'm in love with you, Mac. I always have been, ever since that day at Cedar Point. You're the only man I've ever loved or will ever love," she said. "I trust you completely. I love everything about you, except the part where we were married. You know I need to be free. No commitments, no baggage, no ties. I love my job and my life, but I don't love them more than I love you, and I don't have to choose. You're as faithful as Grandma. We've got an understanding. I don't sleep with anyone but you, never have. You always got that about me, which is why what I'm about to say is going to sound crazy." "Ooh," I joked. "Sounds like I'm in for a shock." She gave me a look. "Yes, you are. Will you marry me, Mac?" I nearly choked on my wine. Getting wine in your lungs is not ideal. Once I recovered, I just sat there stunned, my mouth open. "Stop being an idiot and answer me," she barked. "Hell no," I finally managed. "Why, Bree, we make each other miserable. In a month, we'll be at each other's throats. What's wrong with how things are now?" "Nothing," she admitted. This isn't about us. It's about the sweetest, most adorable girls on the planet. Mac, I'm completely in love with them. You wrecked my life by inviting me over that night. They're desperate to see you. Every night, they beg and cry to come see you. But I'm not giving them up. I've never been happier than I am with them, and no judge would give us custody. Not to me, not to you, not to either of us alone. But if we were married, they'd give them to us in a heartbeat. So I need them. And if I need them, I need you. If you want them, you'll have to deal with me too. Can we do this, Mac? I doubt it, I told her. You're as bad as me. You come home drunk, you're never on time for anything except work, and half the time you don't come home at all. Bree, we've been through this. I know, but what if things are different now? I can't wait to come home to them. I always call when I'm running late, and since they've been with me, I only have 1 glass of wine a night. I didn't know I could feel this way. Marry me, Mac. Give me a chance. We should talk this over, I said. Then talk. What are we doing here? You think I'm joking around? Tell me what's going on. Should I start? I signaled the waiter for more wine. Go ahead. What drives me crazy about you is your need to control me, she said. You have to know every detail. Where I am, who I'm with, what I'm doing, when I'll be home. You're paranoid. If you could just stop trying to control me, we'd still be married. But you can't help it. You know you're the only man I've ever cared about, right? Yeah, I do, I said. It used to drive me nuts. I was always worried you'd find someone else and leave me. That's never going to happen, she promised. I've never even considered another man since the day I met you. Sure, I go to dinners and dances with clients and colleagues, but that's just what I do. No one has touched me, and no one ever will. Do you believe me? Yes, and it's the same for me. I trust you, Bree. I know you'll never hurt me. I've always been in love with you, and I think you feel the same way. We were comfortable where we were. Well, I'm not comfortable anymore, she said. Those girls need a family. I love them almost as much as I love you, more than my job. And I want to be part of their lives. The only way that happens is if we do this together. Will you give me a chance, Mac? Will you marry me so we can be a family? I'll never have kids of my own. I'm too selfish for that. But these girls, we can take care of them. Marry me, and I'll make you happier than you've ever been. Okay, clearly you've had time to think about this, I said. Give me a little time too, okay? She looked at her watch. You got 20 minutes, she said. Wait, what? Do I have a deadline? I asked. Yeah, the girls are waiting outside. They'll be here in 10 minutes, and after a quick walk with Grandma, a car will pick us up and take us home. We quickly finished our food and stepped outside. A limo was waiting, but the girls were nowhere in sight. The driver mentioned they were walking the dog. He didn't seem too happy about it, probably not a fan of dog drool on the seats. After a few minutes, I saw the girls hurrying toward us. Let's go, Maggie said as they approached. Some guy was watching us and Grandma doesn't like him. He growled at him. I looked down the street and saw a young man walking our way. He looked about 20, with tattoos, piercings, a knit cap, and a hoodie. His sagging pants barely stayed on. He probably thought he looked intimidating. What are you staring at? He snapped at me. Nothing. We're just leaving, I replied. It's all yours. Nice jacket, fancy car, pretty women, he sneered. Looks like you've got some cash. The guy was nuts. I stood a good 8 inches taller than him and outweighed him by at least 100 pounds. No beer belly either. You better move along, kid, I told him. My dog really doesn't like you. He got about 4 feet from us. I'm not scared of any dog, he said. How much cash you got on you? He reached under his jacket and I caught a glimpse of metal. I kicked him square in the chest, sending him flying backward. A weapon fell out of his pants. Maggie lost her grip on Granville's leash as he lunged. The guy managed to protect his face with his arm, but I heard the crunch as Granville broke his forearm. He screamed, and Granville shredded his sleeve. Granville, down, I commanded. He backed off, sitting by my side. The guy writhed on the ground as I knelt next to him, Granville close by. Take it, Grandma, I said. Granville lunged forward, his jaws closing near the guy's neck. I think you're an idiot, I told him. What are you, some kind of moron? He nodded, fear etched on his face. Say it, I demanded. He didn't respond. Bite, Grandma, I ordered. The guy whimpered as blood trickled from where Granville's teeth grazed his neck. The sound of Granville's breathing filled the air. Say it, I repeated. I'm an idiot, he whispered. How much money do you have on you? I asked. Hand it over. He reached into his pocket, but Granville squeezed a little harder. Slowly, I warned. He pulled out a wad of cash and handed it to me. Let him go, Grandma, I said. Granville released him, and the guy scrambled backward. I'll give you a 20-yard head start, I told him. Then I'm sending the dog after you. Better run fast. He bolted like a sprinter, but his pants fell halfway down. He stumbled, yanked them up with his good hand, and took off. You need a belt, I called after him. I turned back to the girls, who stood there with their mouths hanging open. I kicked the weapon into a storm drain. What? I asked. Bree was the first to speak. You're one nasty son of a witch, Mac. Remind us never to piss you off? The girls rushed over, and I hugged them. Oh my God, Mac, Stokely whispered into my chest. I thought that guy was scary, but you didn't even break a sweat. You did it for us, didn't you? Well, nobody messes with my girls, I told her. He even left you a little something for your college fund. I handed her the cash. She counted it. $700. The guy must have mugged a few people recently. She split it with Maggie, and we got into the limo. As I leaned back, hugging Maggie, I noticed something. A van's coming for us, I said. I know, Bree replied. It's got some of our stuff. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, I know I take a lot for granted, she laughed. Girls, I said, yes, Bree and I will get married again, and you'll stay with us. The girls gasped and screamed. Really? Maggie asked. She's really not a witch. You were right. We love Bree. She's been so good to us. We have all these new clothes, and she got us into this amazing school. We'll make you both proud. I promise. We know you will, sweetheart. Don't worry, Bree reassured them. I was still in shock, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Mac, you okay? Stokely asked. Bree chuckled. No, he's in full panic mode. His perfectly ordered world is about to get flipped upside down. His house is spotless, everything in perfect condition. Now he'll have underwear hanging in the shower, mixed up books, and drink rings on the coffee table, and it'll drive him crazy. I don't even know how he handles living with Granville. We'll just have to love him enough that he won't care about crumbs on the table. Think we can do that? I think we can, Maggie laughed. I'm not sure how, Bree started. But oh, he loves pretty girls. Just bat your eyelashes and he'll melt. He'll be mad at me, but you girls will have to love us through it. Wait a minute, I groaned. I didn't exactly agree to any of this. Bree, like her usual whirlwind self, was sweeping us all along. Do you love Bree? Stokely asked me. Yes, I love her, on the other side of the city, I joked. Yeah, but we all need to be together, Maggie said. They all burst out laughing at my remark, and I had to join them. The idea was absurd. How had I lost control so quickly? As usual, Brianna had just taken over. What started as my little attempt to help the girls had snowballed into a marriage and adoption plan. It was wild how small actions could send your life spiraling out of control. I thought it was reckless, and told Bree so. When we got back to my house, there was a flurry of activity. Movers were everywhere, hauling in piles of stuff and placing them in different rooms. To my surprise, loads of women's clothes started showing up in Maggie and Stokely's rooms. Where did all this come from? I asked Maggie as she zipped past. Bree took us shopping a few times, she said, before disappearing into her room. Bree popped her head out of my bedroom. Mac, do you ever throw anything away? You still have things from when we were married. I'm getting rid of this junk. I need drawer and closet space. I rushed over to rescue my high school Letterman jacket from the trash. Stop it, Brianna, I shouted. You can't just throw my stuff away. If I didn't want it, I wouldn't keep it. This is my house, and I'll throw your Boney back out if you don't stop. She stuck her head out and glared at me. Boney back, huh? She snorted. Then she grabbed my sleeve and dragged me into the bedroom, which looked like a tornado had hit it. In one swift move, she locked the door, pulled her dress over her head, and leaned over the bed. My breath caught. She wasn't wearing any underwear. We made love, and the next morning I slept in until 10 o'clock. After stumbling into the shower, shaving, and freshening up, I finally felt somewhat human again. Bree was still asleep, her fiery red hair falling across her face as she lay on her stomach. Damn, her bum was incredible. I wandered into the living room and found Granville fast asleep, drooling all over a pile of my best shirts. I sighed, grabbed a glass of orange juice and a bun, and called to him, "Come on, Grandma, let's get out of here." He lifted his head, rolled his eyes, and groaned as he got to his feet. We headed to the backyard, where he did his business before flopping down on my legs. The sun was warm, and I felt lazy, like a lizard basking in the heat. It was unusually warm for this time of year. The door opened, and Stokely stepped out with a glass of milk and a bun. "Hello, Angel," I waved. "Hi, Mac," she said, closing the door behind her. After a moment, she walked over to the glider where I was sitting. "Is there room for me?" she asked. I shifted over and she curled up on my lap, resting her feet on the empty space. She sighed, took a bite of her bun, and looked at me with those big green eyes. "Mac," she began, crumbs falling onto our laps. Ah, I interrupted. "Finish eating, drink your milk, and then talk." She giggled and waited until her mouth was empty. "Mac," she started again, "if you adopt us, will you be our dad and Bree, our mom?" "Is that what you'd like?" I asked. "Oh yes," she said. "Bree would be the coolest mom ever. You're not exactly cool, but you're reliable. I love you, and I think you'd be the best dad in the world." I almost choked. "Well," I muttered, "being reliable is better than being cool, right?" She laughed. "I didn't mean it like that. I just mean Bree's like a force of nature, and you're like a mountain. You know she really, really loves you. She talks about you all the time. She's told us everything about you two. Do you love her?" "Yes, sweetie, but like you said, she's a force of nature. Loving her is like loving a thunderstorm or a wildfire." "Mountains don't care about thunderstorms or wildfires," she said. "Maggie looks a lot like her. I'm more like you." She pressed herself against my chest. "I think we could be the calm at the center of their storm." She looked up at me. "I want you to be our dad, Mac. I never thought we'd find someone like you. And Bree, too." Her voice cracked a little. "We were so scared and alone. Mac, do you have room in your life for girls like us?" I hugged her tighter. "In my heart, Stokely, there's always been a place for you and Maggie. I've wanted someone like you to love me. For years, I didn't think I'd ever have this. Bree never showed any interest in having kids. And I think you girls turned her world upside down just like you did mine. I've seen the way she looks at you. It's like she woke up one day and realized she loves being a mother. You've changed her." "You were right about her," she admitted. "She's amazing. It's overwhelming sometimes. She makes a decision and you just get pulled along." I laughed. "That's always been Bree." The first time I met her, I went to an amusement park with some college friends. She decided I was going to be her ride buddy. I'd actually gone because I liked another girl, but Bree dragged me away, and we never saw the rest of the group. We were 20, and I fell in love with her that day. She's like a virus. She invades your life and takes over. We had our first fight a month after we got married. "What did you fight about?" she asked. "You're going to think this is silly. It was about shoes. She kept moving mine and putting hers in their place. I had to dig through her stuff to find mine. She thinks I'm obsessive. She's probably right. But is it too much to ask that she keep her shoes on her side of the closet?" She exploded. And then I started driving her crazy, and she drove me crazy. I like to have a plan, and she's totally spontaneous. It's just who she is. I love that about her, but it also drives me nuts. She loves that I'm organized, but it drives her nuts. And those differences just kept clashing. Stokely giggled. "Maggie and I fight about stuff like that too. She's always losing things, and then she just decides on the spur of the moment what we're going to do. I think we need to change a little, Mac. We need to go with the flow more. But they need to change too. They need to understand we like things in their place. Do you think we can figure this out?" "I don't know," I admitted. Bree and I never had a reason to try. Our relationship is weird. I love her more now than when we were married, and I think she feels the same. But she's not one to talk about it. She just does things. We're closer now than we ever were when we were married. I like her better now. Back then I loved her, but we were always angry. We got to a point where we didn't need to change, but I think we were too immature and selfish. Maybe you and Maggie made us realize what we were missing. The idea of being a family is exciting, but also terrifying. What if we screw it up? We could lose everything. I hate that kind of risk." "I know, but sometimes you have to take a chance," she said. "You can't get anything good without risking that it might go wrong." I hugged her, and she snuggled against me. "You're the wisest 11-year-old I've ever met," I said. "I'll be 12 next month," she replied. We finished the bun and headed back home. The others were still asleep, so we took Grandma for a walk. By the time we returned, the sleepyheads were up. Bree and Maggie, never morning people, looked like groggy, beautiful cats, stretching and yawning. After their showers, they were like new, full of energy. Bree whisked us away to get our marriage license, file for adoption, and start temporary custody. Later, we had seafood for dinner, and the girls couldn't stop raving about the food and prices. "Wow, Mac, you must make a lot of money," Maggie said. I chuckled. "I make about $90,000 a year, which is more than enough to support us. But Bree? She makes 10 times more. They stared at her in shock. Bree laughed. It's just money. The point is, we can treat you girls whenever you want. And honestly, Mac cooks better than most restaurants. You cook? Maggie asked. Bree nodded. Yes, but simple things. Anyone can follow a recipe, but this guy, he's a genius in the kitchen. She's pretty good too, I added, if only she could stay focused. Bree playfully hit me. Make one mistake and he'll never let it go, she joked. I grinned. In our first year, she burnt food so badly, not even the dog would eat it. She'd take it outside and leave it under a tree, like some kind of burnt offering. Everyone laughed. Bree, in a great mood, snuggled up to me and the girls giggled. We've never eaten anywhere this nice, Maggie said. Bree gave her a serious look. Maggie, say it again with confidence. Maggie smiled, straightened up, and repeated herself with pride. Bree grinned. See, we may be from Detroit, but we've got class. The girls beamed, clearly proud. Over time, Bree taught them everything, from how to dress to how to walk, talk, and carry themselves. In just 6 months, they went from street smart to sophisticated, excelling in everything they did. That night, Bree was excited. Back home, she told the girls, turn on the TV and leave it on all night. They laughed, knowing what was coming next. She grabbed my hand and led me to the bedroom. We're celebrating tonight, she said with a mischievous smile. What are we celebrating? I asked. The start of something incredible, she whispered. I love you, Mac. I'll remind you of that every night and show you just how special we are. Tonight, we take it to a new level. Ready? Show me, I said, feeling the heat between us. With a smile, she let her fiery red hair down. A rare sight. Her hair fell in waves down her back, making her even more irresistible. She turned, her eyes gleaming. Unzip me, she murmured. I slowly unzipped her dress, feeling the tension build as the fabric slid off her shoulders. She stood before me in high heels and a lacy white bra, arching her back slightly, more stunning than ever. Bree always exuded confidence, but tonight was different. She radiated sensuality as she dropped her bra and teased. Looks like you're overdressed. And what are we going to do about that? I asked, my voice full of anticipation. She moved closer, her body flowing smoothly, and gently pushed me onto the bed. Kneeling beside my hips, she unbuttoned my shirt, slipping it off and briefly trapping my arms before tossing it aside. With skilled hands, she undid my belt and pants, pulling them down along with my socks and shoes. I lay there, fully exposed, overwhelmed by her intensity. This wasn't just physical. It was Bree at her most vulnerable. We made love, and afterward, I felt a new depth in our connection. She looked at me, her eyes soft but full of emotion. Mac, I love you, she said, her voice trembling. I've been selfish, never really giving myself to anyone until now. Do you want me? I'm ready to be your friend, lover, wife, and a mother to the girls. Will you help me? Be patient with me. You'll never regret it. I kissed her deeply. I love you more than anything. You'll need to be patient with me too. We're a team, and we can do this together. I'll do anything for you and the girls, she whispered. I'm scared I'll be a bad mom. I've always feared it. That's why I never wanted kids. I don't know how to be a father either, I laughed. But I think we'll figure it out. I don't know how to be a good wife, she admitted. We messed up before. I know, I agreed. But it wasn't all you. It was, she said. I was immature, but I'll try to grow up. Me too, I said, holding her close. Eventually, we drifted off to sleep. The next morning, we showered together, laughing and teasing. Afterward, Bree put on her pajamas, glowing with happiness. What's going on? I asked. We'll have guests soon, she said with a sly smile. I shrugged, put on some clothes, and sure enough, there was a knock at the door. Stokely burst in, followed by the family dog, and soon Maggie joined too. We had a playful wrestling match, with the dog winning, of course. After a while, we all headed out for breakfast. Later, Bree announced we had an appointment. Where? I asked, suspicious. You'll see, she said with a grin. We drove to the courthouse, and as we entered, I started to understand. Do you have business here? I asked. Yes, a very important case, she laughed. Inside, Bree knelt down and pulled a small box from her purse. Mac, will you marry me again? She asked, her voice confident. This time, it's forever. I never stopped loving you, and I want to be your wife again. She held our old wedding rings along with her engagement ring. Brianna, are you sure? I asked, my heart racing. I've never been more sure, she replied. Girls, help me out, he's so stubborn. Yes, please, Mac, they begged. We want to be a family. We love you and Bree." How could I resist? In about 10 minutes, we were married again. To celebrate, Bree took us to a new Greek restaurant. As I sat there, looking at Bree, the girls, and our future, I felt my life unfolding. The most beautiful woman was my wife, and I had 2 amazing daughters who were growing up fast. Their happiness filled me with joy. Could we make this work? Only time would tell. It took a month to get custody of the girls. Bree worked tirelessly, and when it finally happened, they were the happiest I'd ever seen them. And so were we. Bree sold her apartment and moved in with me. I worried about us getting on each other's nerves, but it went better than I expected. A few weeks after the wedding, Bree forgot to call us after a dinner with a client. When she came home, we were all waiting. Stokely held up the phone, and Bree immediately realized her mistake. Without saying a word, she burst into tears, dropping to her knees in front of us. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I forgot to call. I'll do my best not to let it happen again." Her apology was a turning point. Bree rarely apologized, so this showed real growth. Stokely hugged her first, then Maggie, and finally, I joined them. "It's okay, we understand," I said. From that moment, Bree and I made more effort to make each other happy, and the girls were great at helping us. We had small disagreements, but I'd never felt more content. Bree enrolled the girls in the private school where I taught, and we grew closer during our daily rides together. They shared their thoughts, dreams, and worries, filling my life with energy. After school, they'd do their homework, and then we'd walk the dog before dinner. Dinner was usually at 5, and Bree would join us around 6:30. If she was running late, she'd call, and we'd go out for dinner instead. When Maggie turned 16, she only wanted one thing: her driver's license. She studied hard and passed on her first try. The night before her birthday, Bree casually brought up a new idea in bed. "I want to buy Maggie a car," she said. "Okay, what kind?" I asked. "A new Camaro convertible," she said with a gleam in her eye. "How much will that cost?" I asked. "Mac, does it really matter?" she replied, rolling her eyes. "Do you think we're going broke?" "No, I'd just like to know," I chuckled. "Sorry," she smiled, kissing me. "I think it'll be about $60,000. I whistled. "That's a lot for a car." "She deserves it," Bree said softly. "Yes, she does," I agreed. We ordered the car, a bright yellow Camaro with black stripes and a sleek black interior. Bree insisted on getting the big V8 engine, thinking it would hold its value better. And although I had some reservations, she was probably right. When the car arrived, we parked it in the garage and waited until Maggie's birthday morning. The next day, as usual, the girls grabbed their bags and followed me to the car for school. Bree was already in the garage, but I hadn't unlocked the doors. "Dad, let us in," Stokely said, sounding confused. "You're not riding with me today," I said teasingly. Maggie looked puzzled. "You're driving, Maggie," I said, holding out the keys. "Mom's not going to work?" Maggie asked, still not catching on. "No," I said, motioning toward the garage. "She's leaving. But what are you going to drive?" Maggie looked confused, and then I pressed the garage door opener. As the door lifted, her new Camaro came into view. Her big green eyes widened in shock. They both stood still, speechless. Suddenly, Maggie started crying, tears streaming down her face as she trembled, unable to speak. I jumped out of the car, and Bree rushed over, wrapping her arms around Maggie. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, worried. "We thought you'd be happy. This is your car. It's for your birthday." Maggie buried her face in Bree's chest, crying too hard to answer. Stokely hugged her too, and we stood there holding Maggie until she could calm down enough to talk. Finally, Maggie whispered, "I don't need a car. I love you both so much, and this is too much. Stokely and I already talked about it. We don't need anything. We just need you to love us." I kissed her cheek. "We love you so much, Maggie," Bree said, her voice shaking. "We love you both more than anything in the world. Having you in our lives is a dream come true. We love giving you things because it makes us happy to see you happy. It's one of the ways we show our love." Now Stokely was crying too. I hugged them both. "Let's go check out the car," I said gently. "At least take a look." They wiped their tears and let us lead them to the garage. I opened the driver's door for Maggie, and Bree opened the passenger side for Stokely. Maggie put her hands on the steering wheel, smiling through her tears. "It suits you," I told her softly. "Go ahead, start it up." Maggie turned the key, and the V8 engine roared to life. Both girls giggled through their tears, excitement starting to take over. I knocked on the window, and Maggie rolled it down. I leaned in and kissed her forehead. "See you at school," I said with a grin. She drove out of the garage and stopped just outside the driveway. Then she suddenly ran back, throwing herself into our arms, kissing us over and over. "I love you so much," she cried. "Thank you. You're the best mom and dad ever." She ran back to the car, and they drove off, the engine rumbling. I turned to Bree, and she was crying too. Somehow, I realized I had tears running down my face as well. "Look at us," I said, laughing through my tears. "You'd think we were the ones turning 16. "It was a great idea, Bree. You're incredible," I said, hugging her tightly. For Stokely's 16th birthday, we did the same thing. It wasn't quite as emotional as Maggie's, but it was still a special moment. The girls were growing up fast, and our family was stronger than ever. We took them on trips to Hawaii and Belize, celebrated their achievements, and watched them grow into amazing young women. When Maggie graduated from high school, she was already well into her college studies. The day Stokely started college, I came home to find Bree sitting on the couch, crying. I sat down beside her and wrapped my arms around her. We sat in silence for a while, just holding each other. Eventually, Bree looked up at me, her blue eyes full of tears. "Our kids are grown up, Mac," she whispered. "I know," I replied, kissing her gently. "That's what kids do." She cupped my face in her hands, looking deeply into my eyes. "Let's have another one, Mac," she said, her voice trembling. "This time, just you and me. I want a baby, Mac." She broke down, crying harder. "I never thought I'd want this. I love you so much, and I miss them so much already. I want to do it again. It was so amazing. I know they're only 60 miles away, but I miss them." "I miss them too, kitten," I whispered, holding her close. "Maybe we should start practicing if we're serious about this baby." Bree gasped, looking up at me with wide eyes. "Really? You mean it? You want a baby?" "Of course," I said, smiling. "I hope it's a red-haired girl just like you. I love you with all my heart, Bree." I picked her up and carried her through the empty house to our bedroom, ready to start the next chapter of our lives. We had to kick Granville out of the room, but that didn't matter. We were building something new, something beautiful. As I drifted off to sleep, my eyes landed on the picture of Maggie and Stokely on the nightstand. They didn't look like strangers anymore. They looked like family.
I usually don't ask this early, but if you could like the video and subscribe, it would mean a lot. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support can really help get my content out there. Thanks. It was the night of the most anticipated event of the year, the Von Euler Enterprises Annual Gala. A lavish affair hosted at Le Grand Palais, the most prestigious venue in the heart of Paris. The company had rented the grand ballroom, its high arched ceilings adorned with intricate gold moldings and massive chandeliers that sparkled like constellations. Every guest in attendance was dressed to perfection in the finest attire Parisian couture could offer. Wine flowed freely, and the hum of networking executives, laughter, and light conversations echoed off the marble floors. Alexandre Villeneuve adjusted his bow tie for what felt like the 100th time. At 34, he was a mid-level financial analyst at Von Euler Enterprises, which wasn't an insignificant achievement, but it was far from where he wanted to be. Alexandre was the kind of man who had always done things by the book, polite, reserved, and practical. He was tall, with dark hair that was just starting to thin at the top, but he kept himself in shape, if only because his wife Isabella was often surrounded by people much wealthier and more influential than him. His wife, Isabella de la Roche, was the reason he had reluctantly attended tonight's gala. At 30, she was stunning, with flowing auburn hair, soft porcelain skin, and piercing green eyes that could captivate a room. Isabella was the rising star of Von Euler Enterprises, having carved out a name for herself as an exceptional marketing executive. Unlike Alexandre, she thrived in high society events like this one. She wore a sleek black gown that hugged her curves perfectly, drawing more than a few admiring glances from the other guests. But tonight, Alexandre noticed something else in her demeanor, a certain restlessness that unsettled him. Their marriage, once filled with excitement, had become strained in recent years. Between her long hours at work, the constant traveling, and the social obligations that came with her career, they had drifted apart. Isabella had started coming home late more often, explaining it away as business dinners or late meetings. Alexandra wanted to believe her, though a nagging feeling in the back of his mind told him that something wasn't right. As they moved through the glittering crowd, making polite conversation with colleagues and clients, Alexandra found himself growing increasingly anxious. He was out of place here, amidst the titans of industry. This was Isabella's world, a world of money, power, and influence. Across the room, Maximilian von Eylor, the 45-year-old CEO of the company, stood out like a king among courtiers. Tall, with broad shoulders and an aristocratic jawline, his salt and pepper hair gave him a distinguished air. He was dressed in a tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than Alexandra's annual salary. Maximilian was known for his ruthlessness in business and his charm with women. He was the kind of man who could command a room with just his presence, and tonight he was clearly the center of attention. Alexandra noticed Isabella's eyes dart toward Maximilian several times throughout the night. There was something in her gaze, something that made his stomach churn. She had mentioned before how much respect she had for Maximilian, how much she had learned from him. But the way her eyes lingered on him now felt different. "Darling, are you all right?" Alexandra asked quietly, leaning closer to Isabella as they stood near the champagne table. Isabella snapped out of her daze and smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be? You seem distracted." She chuckled, brushing off his concern. "It's just work. These events are exhausting, you know. Always having to impress, always putting on a show." Alexandra nodded, though he wasn't convinced. Before he could press further, a familiar voice interrupted them. "Well, well, Alexandra Villeneuve," came the smooth, commanding tone of Maximilian von Eylor. "Enjoying yourself?" Maximilian appeared beside them, a glass of whiskey in hand and a smirk playing on his lips. Alexandra immediately felt the temperature in the room drop. He forced a polite smile and extended his hand. "Mr. von Eylor, thank you for inviting us. The event is spectacular." Maximilian ignored the handshake, his eyes fixed on Isabella. "Ah, Isabella, you look stunning as always." Isabella flushed slightly under his gaze, and Alexandra's grip on his champagne glass tightened. There was a familiarity between them that made his heart race in all the wrong ways. "You're too kind, Mr. von Eylor," Isabella replied, her voice soft but with a certain edge that Alexandra hadn't heard in a long time. Maximilian took a long sip from his glass, his gaze never leaving Isabella. "I must steal her away for a moment, Alexandra," he said, though it wasn't a request. "We have some business matters to discuss." Alexandra hesitated, his unease growing, but before he could object, Isabella touched his arm. "It's just a quick chat," she said, her smile reassuring. "I'll be back soon." And just like that, she was gone, swept away by Maximilian's magnetic pull. Alexandra watched as they moved through the crowd, the CEO leaning in close to speak to her, too close for comfort. As he stood there, alone and feeling more out of place than ever, Alexandra's mind raced. Was it just business? Or was there something more going on? He had always trusted Isabella, but lately, something had shifted between them. He couldn't shake the feeling that Maximilian had something to do with it. The night dragged on, and though Isabella eventually returned to his side, her mind seemed elsewhere. They mingled with other guests, exchanged pleasantries, but the connection between them felt strained, like a rope that had been frayed and was now on the verge of snapping. The gala continued in a blur of laughter, clinking glasses and the glow of chandeliers. But Alexandra was hardly present. His mind kept circling back to Maximilian's words, the way his wife had looked at him, and the creeping sense of betrayal he couldn't shake. Eventually, The night drew to a close. The ballroom began to empty as guests said their goodbyes and drifted off into the Parisian night. Alexandra and Isabella returned to their shared apartment in the 8th arrondissement, a luxurious space they had purchased during the early days of their marriage when life had seemed full of promise. But tonight, the apartment felt colder than usual. Isabella had gone straight to the bedroom, claiming she was exhausted. Alexandra, however, couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room, staring out the window at the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower in the distance. His mind replayed the events of the evening over and over again. He kept seeing the way Maximilian had spoken to Isabella, the way she had responded to him. Eventually, Alexandra couldn't take it anymore. He walked quietly down the hall and opened the door to their bedroom. Isabella was already in bed, her back turned to him, the covers pulled up to her shoulders. For a moment he considered letting it go, but the words were already tumbling out of his mouth before he could stop them. "Isabella?" he said quietly. She didn't respond. "Isabella, are you awake?" She shifted slightly but didn't turn around. "What is it, Alexandra?" He hesitated, his heart pounding. "Is there something going on between you and Maximilian?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Isabella didn't answer right away, and the silence felt like a confirmation of his worst fears. Finally, she sighed and sat up, turning to face him. Her expression was a mix of guilt and frustration. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Alexandra said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I've seen the way you look at him, the way he talks to you. Tonight, it was obvious." Isabella's eyes flashed with irritation. "Alexandra, you're being ridiculous. Maximilian is my boss. That's all." "Is that all?" Alexandra shot back, unable to contain the bitterness in his voice. "Because it doesn't look that way to me. It hasn't for a while now." Isabella's face softened for a moment, and she looked away, as if struggling to find the right words. "You're overthinking this. Yes, Maximilian and I are close, but it's just professional. We spend a lot of time together because of work, but that's it." But Alexandra could hear the hesitation in her voice, and it only fueled his suspicions. "Don't lie to me, Isabella. He said, his voice rising. "I deserve the truth." She looked at him then, her green eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resignation. And in that moment, Alexandra knew. The truth was written all over her face. "I'm sorry, Alexandra," she whispered, her voice barely audible. His heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. He had suspected it, but hearing the confirmation was like a punch to the gut. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Isabella looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "It's been going on for a few years," she admitted. "It started out as just a mistake, but then—" Alexandra felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and for years he had been living in the dark. Tears stung at the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "How could you do this to me?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "How could you throw away everything we've built?" Isabella looked up at him then, her own eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "But Maximilian, he's powerful and— I don't know, Alexandra. I got caught up in it. I never wanted to hurt you." But she had hurt him, more deeply than she could ever understand. The following weeks were a blur of pain, anger, and confusion. Alexandra moved out of their apartment and filed for divorce. He couldn't bear to be near her anymore, knowing that she had chosen another man over him. But life went on, as it always does. Alexandra threw himself into his work, trying to rebuild his life piece by piece. The divorce was finalized quickly, and he never saw Isabella again. Maximilian von Eylor continued to run his empire, untouched by the scandal. To him, Alexandra had always been a small, insignificant man. But Alexandra realized that in walking away, he had gained something far more valuable than revenge: his freedom. And sometimes, that was the greatest victory of all. Thank you for reading this story. Do you think Alexandra made the right choice by walking away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales. See you next time.
Help us reach 1,000 subscribers on our new channel, Cheating Tales Lab. We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Spencer Durham woke up at 5 a.m., as he always did. He reached for his phone, his fingers tapping out his passcode by muscle memory. He had a text from his wife, Kristen. "Miss you, babe. Can't wait to see you tonight." Spencer smiled. After 12 years of marriage, Kristen still made his heart skip a beat. He typed out a quick reply, then headed for the shower. As the hot water cascaded over his body, he thought about surprising Kristen with dinner reservations at Le Petit Bistro, her favorite French restaurant. The day flew by in a blur of meetings and conference calls. Spencer's company, Durham Tech, was on the verge of a breakthrough in quantum computing. If successful, it would revolutionize the tech industry and solidify Durham Tech's position as a market leader. As he drove home, Spencer's mind drifted to the future. He and Kristen had been talking about starting a family. Maybe tonight would be the night they'd decide to try. He pulled into the driveway of their craftsman-style home, noticing with surprise that Kristen's car was already there. She usually worked late on Thursdays. Spencer entered quietly, intending to surprise her. He heard Kristen's voice coming from the study, laughter in her tone. She must be on the phone. "I can't wait to see you either," Kristen was saying. "Spencer's out of town until tomorrow. We'll have the whole night to ourselves." Spencer froze, his hand on the doorknob. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some explanation. "I've got something special planned," Kristen continued, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. "Remember that little red number you like so much?" Spencer's vision blurred. He pushed open the door, startling Kristen. She whirled around, her face draining of color as she saw him. "Spencer," she gasped, "you're home early." Spencer's voice was ice. "Clearly." Kristen's eyes darted to her phone, then back to Spencer. "It's not what you think." "Really?" Spencer's laugh was bitter. "Because I think you're planning to fuck someone else in our bed tonight." Kristen's demeanor changed, defiance replacing shock. "Fine. You want the truth? I'm going on a date tonight, with someone who actually pays attention to me." Spencer felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "What are you talking about? We'd been married for 12 years. Kristen's laugh was cruel. "And for the last 5, you've been married to your company. I'm done playing second fiddle to Durham Tech. So, instead of talking to me, you decide to cheat?" "Oh, grow up, Spencer," Kristen sneered. "This isn't some fairy tale. People change. Feelings change. I've changed." Spencer struggled to process what was happening. "Who is he?" Kristen's smile was vicious. "Someone who knows how to treat a woman. Someone who isn't afraid of success." The implication hit Spencer like a physical blow. "It's Scott Cahill, isn't it? My competitor?" Kristen's silence was answer enough. Spencer's mind raced. Scott Cahill, CEO of Cahill Tech, had been making aggressive moves in the market lately. And now this. "How long?" Kristen shrugged. "Long enough to know he's a better man than you'll ever be." "Get out," Spencer said, his voice deadly quiet. "Gladly," Kristen replied. "Oh, and Spencer? I'll be taking half of everything in the divorce. Enjoy your precious company while you still have it." She brushed past him, the scent of her perfume, the perfume he'd bought her for their anniversary, making his stomach turn. Spencer stood in the empty study, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He needed air. He needed space. He needed revenge. He stumbled out of the house, barely aware of where he was going. His feet carried him to the park where he and Kristen had their first date. He collapsed onto a bench, his mind reeling. How had he not seen this coming? Had he really been so blind, so focused on his work that he'd driven Kristen into another man's arms? No. Spencer's jaw clenched. This wasn't his fault. Kristen had made a choice. She could have talked to him, could have told him she was unhappy. Instead, she'd chosen to betray him in the worst possible way. And with Scott Cahill, of all people, the man who'd been trying to undermine Durham Tech at every turn, was this just about hurting Spencer, or was there more to it? Spencer pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking slightly as he dialed a number. Ricardo, it's Spencer Durham. I need your services. Discreetly. Ricardo Finn was the best private investigator in the city. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was him. I'll text you the details, Spencer said. I want to know everything. Who, what, when, where. And I want to know what, if anything, this has to do with my company. He ended the call, feeling a cold determination settle over him. Kristen thought she could take half of everything. She had no idea what was coming. Spencer spent the next week in a haze of work and sleepless nights. He threw himself into Durham Tech, pushing the quantum computing project forward with a ferocity that both impressed and worried his team. Kristen tried to call several times. Spencer let it go to voicemail. She could wait until he had all the facts. Finally, Ricardo called. I have what you need, he said. My office. 1 hour. Spencer arrived at Ricardo's office exactly 60 minutes later. The PI's office was dim, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. Ricardo gestured for Spencer to sit. It's not good, he said without preamble. Spencer's stomach clenched. Tell me. Ricardo slid a folder across the desk. Kristen's been having an affair with Scott Cahill for the past 8 months. Spencer opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos showing Kristen entering Scott's office building late at night, leaving early in the morning, her hair mussed, wearing the same clothes as the night before. There's more, Ricardo said. He pushed another folder toward Spencer. Financial records. Large sums of money being transferred from Kristen's personal account to offshore holdings linked to Scott. Spencer's mind raced. The timing coincided with several unexplained leaks of sensitive information from Durham Tech, information that had given Cahill Tech a significant advantage in recent months. She's been selling me out, Spencer said, his voice hollow. Ricardo nodded. It looks that way. Spencer leaned back in his chair, his mind whirling. This wasn't just about an affair. This was corporate espionage. This was an attempt to destroy everything he built. What do you want to do? Ricardo asked. Spencer's eyes hardened. I want to destroy them both. Ricardo raised an eyebrow. That could get messy. I don't care, Spencer said. They try to take everything from me. Now I'm going to take everything from them. Ricardo nodded slowly. I'll need more time, more resources. You'll have whatever you need, Spencer said. I want every skeleton in their closets, every dirty secret, every weakness. As he left Ricardo's office, Spencer felt a strange calm settle over him. The pain and betrayal were still there, but they were overshadowed by a cold, implacable anger. Kristen and Scott thought they could play him for a fool. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Spencer's first stop was Durham Tech. He needed to secure his company against further attacks. He called an emergency meeting with his most trusted employee and friend, Danny Donnelly, the CFO. We've been compromised, Spencer said without preamble as Danny entered his office. Danny's eyes widened. How bad? Bad, Spencer replied. He filled Danny in on Kristen's betrayal and the corporate espionage. Danny whistled low. Jesus, Spence. I'm so sorry. Spencer waved away the sympathy. I need your help, Danny. We need to protect the company. Danny nodded. All business now. What do you need? I want to create a series of shell companies, Spencer said. We'll use them to obscure ownership of our key patents and technologies. Danny frowned. That's risky, Spence. If the SEC gets wind of it, it's riskier to do nothing. Spencer cut him off. Kaotech is coming for us. We need to be prepared. Danny nodded slowly. Okay, what else? I want to transfer a significant portion of our liquid assets to secure offshore accounts, Spencer continued. And we need new security protocols. Nothing leaves this building without triple verification. Danny's eyebrows shot up. You're really going to war, aren't you? Spencer's smile was grim. They started this war, Danny. I'm just making sure we finish it. As Danny left to set things in motion, Spencer turned to his computer. He had one more card to play. He pulled up his email and composed a message to Abby, Kristen's estranged sister. They hadn't spoken in years. Not since Kristen had manipulated their father into cutting Abby out of his will. Abby, he wrote, I know it's been a long time, and I'm sorry to reach out like this, but I need to talk to you. It's about Kristen. Please meet me at the Bluebird Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll explain everything. He hit send, then leaned back in his chair. Abby was a wild card, but if she was willing to help, she could be a powerful ally. The next day, Spencer arrived at the Bluebird Cafe early. He chose a quiet booth in the back, his eyes on the door. Abby walked in at exactly 2 p.m. Her eyes scanned the cafe, landing on Spencer. She hesitated for a moment, then walked over. Spencer, she said, sliding into the booth. It's been a while. Spencer nodded. Thank you for coming, Abby. Abby's eyes narrowed. What's this about, Spencer? Your message was pretty cryptic. Spencer took a deep breath. It's about Kristen. She's been having an affair. Abby's eyebrows shot up. Wow. Can't say I'm entirely surprised. Who's the guy? Scott Cahill, my main competitor. Abby let out a low whistle. Damn, Kristen always did know how to pick him. Spencer leaned forward. There's more. She's been feeding him information about my company, helping him try to take me down. Abby's face hardened. That bitch, she muttered, always looking out for number one. I need your help, Abby, Spencer said. I need to know everything about Kristen's past, everything she's tried to hide. Abby studied him for a long moment. You're going to war with her, aren't you? Spencer nodded. She tried to destroy everything I built. I'm not going to let her get away with it. A slow smile spread across Abby's face. Well, looks like my dear sister has finally bitten off more than she can chew. She leaned forward. All right, Spencer. I'm in. What do you want to know? For the next hour, Abby filled Spencer in on Kristen's past. The college professor she'd seduced for better grades. The first boss she'd manipulated into giving her promotions. The string of wealthy boyfriends she'd used and discarded. Kristen's always been good at using people, Abby concluded. But she's never faced anyone willing to fight back. Until now. Spencer nodded slowly. Thank you, Abby. This helps more than you know. As they parted ways, Abby caught Spencer's arm. Make her pay, Spencer. For both of us. Spencer's smile was cold. Oh, I intend to. As he walked back to his car, Spencer's mind was racing. He had the pieces now. The shell companies to protect Durham Tech. The offshore accounts to secure his assets. And now, thanks to Abby, a clearer picture of who he was really dealing with. Kristen thought she was so clever. She thought she could manipulate him, use him, and then discard him when something better came along. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Spencer pulled out his phone and dialed Ricardo. I've got more information, he said when the PI answered. I want to move to the next phase. It's time to start applying pressure. Ricardo asked, This might get messy. Spencer's voice was steel. They want a war? Let's give them one. As he hung up, Spencer felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Kristen and Scott had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. The game was on, and Spencer intended to win no matter the cost. Spencer Durham stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city below. 2 weeks had passed since his meeting with Abby. 2 weeks of meticulous planning, of setting the stage for what was to come. His phone buzzed. A text from Ricardo. "It's happening. Cahill Tech just made their move." Spencer allowed himself a cold smile. Right on schedule. He turned to his computer, pulling up the live stock ticker. Cahill Tech was aggressively buying up Durham Tech stock, causing a stir in the tech world. Message boards were lighting up with speculation. The financial news networks were already running breaking news banners. Spencer picked up his phone, dialing Danny. "It's time," he said when the CFO answered. "Release the reports." Within the hour, Durham Tech released a series of financial reports that painted a bleak picture of the company's future. Projected earnings were down. R&D costs were up. The quantum computing project was facing unforeseen obstacles. The effect was immediate. Durham Tech's stock price began to fall. Spencer watched the numbers tick down, feeling a satisfaction. He could almost picture Scott Cahill's face, the smug bastard thinking he had Spencer on the ropes. His phone rang again. This time, it was John Turner, the mole Spencer had planted in Cahill Tech's upper management. "Scott's calling an emergency board meeting," John reported. "He's pushing hard for this takeover." "Good," Spencer said. "Keep feeding him the information we discussed. Make him think he's got us cornered." As he hung up, Spencer allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of Kristen, wondered if she was watching this unfold. Did she feel a twinge of regret? Or was she too busy planning how to spend her half of Cahill Tech's soon-to-be inflated stock value? The thought hardened his resolve. He picked up his phone again, this time calling his PR team. "Start the rumor mill," he instructed. "I want whispers about a revolutionary new product in every tech blog and forum by end of day." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Spencer barely slept, subsisting on coffee and pure adrenaline. He watched as Scott Cahill pushed forward with his takeover bid, growing more desperate with each passing hour. Durham Tech's stock continued to fall, but not as sharply as it should have given the dire financial reports. The rumors of a game-changing new product were doing their job, creating just enough uncertainty to keep investors from completely jumping ship. On the fourth day, Spencer received another call from John. "Scott's getting paranoid," John reported. "He suspects there's a leak. He's having IT go through everyone's emails and phone records." Spencer smiled. "Good. Keep your head down. We're almost there." That afternoon, Spencer called a meeting of Durham Tech's board and key investors. The conference room was tense, filled with worried faces and whispered conversations. Spencer stood at the head of the table, surveying the room. These were the people who had believed in him, who had helped build Durham Tech from the ground up. He owed them the truth. "I know you're all concerned," he began. "The past few days have been challenging, to say the least." He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "But I'm here to tell you that everything is going according to plan." A murmur ran through the room. Spencer held up a hand for silence. Cahill Tech's takeover attempt was anticipated. In fact, we've been preparing for it for weeks. The financial reports, the stock devaluation, it's all part of a larger strategy. He clicked a button on his laptop, and a series of graphs appeared on the screen behind him. "What you're looking at is the real state of Durham Tech. Our quantum computing project isn't failing. It's weeks ahead of schedule. Our projected earnings? They're conservative estimates at best." The mood in the room began to shift from anxiety to cautious optimism. "I've called you here today because I need your trust," Spencer continued. "What I'm about to share cannot leave this room. But I promise you, if you stand with me now, Durham Tech will not only survive this attack, we'll emerge stronger than ever." For the next hour, Spencer laid out his plan in detail. By the time he finished, the room was buzzing with excitement. The board members and investors left with renewed confidence, ready to weather the storm. As the last person filed out, Danny approached Spencer. "That was one hell of a performance," he said. clapping Spencer on the shoulder. You think it'll be enough? Spencer nodded. It has to be. We're all in now. That night, as Spencer was preparing to finally get some much-needed sleep, his phone buzzed with a text from Ricardo. Got something you need to see. Le Ciel. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Spencer frowned. Lucille was the most exclusive rooftop restaurant in the city. What could Ricardo have found there? The next evening, Spencer arrived at Lucille promptly at 8. Ricardo was waiting for him at the bar. What's this about? Spencer asked as he sat down. Ricardo nodded towards a table near the window. Take a look, but try not to be obvious about it. Spencer casually glanced in the direction Ricardo had indicated. His blood ran cold. Sitting at the table, looking intimate and carefree, were Kristen and Scott Cale. Spencer's hands clenched into fists. Their anniversary, he growled. Ricardo nodded. Thought you want to know. Spencer's mind raced. Part of him wanted to march over there, to confront them, to wipe those smug smiles off their faces. But no, that wasn't the plan. He needed to be smarter than that. He pulled out his phone, dialing Abby's number. How fast can you get to Lucille? He asked when she answered. And how do you feel about creating a scene? 30 minutes later, Spencer and Abby walked into Lucille arm in arm. They were both dressed impeccably. Spencer in a tailored suit that accentuated his athletic build. Abby in a stunning red dress that turned heads as they passed. They secured a table with a clear view of Kristen and Scott, then settled in to wait. As the main course arrived, Spencer and Abby made their move. They stood up, making their way towards Kristen and Scott's table, as if heading to the restrooms. Kristen saw them first. Her eyes widened in shock, the wine glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. Scott turned to see what had startled Kristen, his face paling as he recognized Spencer. Well, well, Spencer said, his voice carrying in the sudden hush that had fallen over the restaurant. Isn't this cozy? Kristen recovered first. Spencer, she hissed. What are you doing here? Having dinner, Spencer replied casually. With my date. He gestured to Abby, who smiled sweetly. Your date. Kristen's voice was strangled. But that's my sister. Scott stood up, trying to defuse the situation. Look, Spencer, I know this looks bad, but bad. Spencer laughed, the sound cold and mirthless. No, Scott. Bad was when you tried to steal my company's secrets. Bad was when you launched a hostile takeover of my life's work. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. This is just the beginning. Kristen's face was a mask of fury. How dare you, she spat. You show up here with my own sister? You're nothing but a... Careful, Kristen. Abby cut in, her voice honey-sweet. You might not want to finish that sentence. Not when there are so many important people around to hear it. For the first time, Kristen and Scott seemed to realize they had an audience. Several tables around them were occupied by some of the city's most influential tech executives and journalists, all watching the scene unfold with rapt attention. Spencer smiled, a predator's grin. You two enjoy your dinner, he said. I'm sure you have a lot to talk about. As he and Abby turned to leave, Spencer paused, looking back at Scott. Oh, and Scott, you might want to double-check those Durham Tech financials. I have a feeling there might be some discrepancies. They walked away, leaving Kristen and Scott staring after them in stunned silence. As they reached their table, Abby let out a low whistle. That was intense, she said. You okay? Spencer took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Yeah, he said. I'm better than okay. I'm just getting started. They raised their glasses in a quiet toast, both knowing that the real battle was only beginning. A week after the restaurant incident, Kristen paced nervously in a private room at Scott's club. The past 7 days had been a nightmare. Their carefully constructed plans were unraveling at an alarming rate. The door opened and Scott walked in. He looked haggard, his usual polished appearance marred by dark circles under his eyes and a day's worth of stubble. This is a disaster, Kristen hissed as soon as the door closed behind him. Spencer's 3 steps ahead of us at every turn. How did this happen? Scott ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I don't know, he admitted, but we need to do something drastic. Now. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. I've had my team working around the clock. We've fabricated evidence of tax evasion and illegal offshore accounts in Spencer's name. Kristen's eyes widened. Is that enough? Scott nodded. It's enough to ruin him, to force him to step down from Durham Tech to avoid prosecution. Kristen felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. And the divorce? If he steps down, agrees to hand over control of Durham Tech, we can offer him a quiet divorce. No scandal, no dragging his name through the mud. Kristen nodded slowly. Do it. Set up a meeting. 2 days later, Spencer walked into a conference room at the Ritz-Carlton. Kristen and Scott were already there, looking tense but determined. Spencer. Scott began as soon as he sat down. We have a proposition for you. Spencer leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. I'm listening. Scott slid the folder across the table. We have evidence of some financial irregularities on your part. Tax evasion, illegal offshore accounts, the kind of thing that could land you in federal prison. Spencer didn't even glance at the folder. Is that so? Kristen leaned forward. We're willing to make this all go away, Spencer. All you have to do is step down from Durham Tech. Hand over control to Scott. And in return, Spencer's voice was eerily calm. A quiet divorce, Kristen said. No scandal. No mudslinging. You walk away with your reputation intact. Spencer was silent for a long moment. Then, to Kristen and Scott's surprise, he smiled. That's a very interesting offer, he said. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small device. But I have a counterproposal. He pressed a button on the device, and suddenly the room was filled with Kristen and Scott's voices, discussing their plans to blackmail Spencer. The color drained from their faces as they realized what was happening. You see, Spencer continued, his voice hardening, I've been recording our conversations for quite some time now. I have evidence of your affair, your corporate espionage, and now your attempt at blackmail. He stood up, looming over the table. So here's my offer. You both resign from Kale Tech immediately. You admit to your shareholders that you attempted a hostile takeover based on stolen information. And Kristen, you agree to a divorce settlement on my terms. Kristen and Scott stared at him in shocked silence. Or, Spencer continued, I can take this recording, along with all the other evidence I've collected, to the FBI. I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing about your activities. The united front between Kristen and Scott crumbled instantly. You manipulated me. Kristen shrieked at Scott. You said this was foolproof. Scott's face twisted with anger. Me? You're the one who came to me in the first place, looking for a way to secure your financial future, remember? As they turned on each other, Spencer calmly gathered his things and walked to the door. He paused, looking back at the bickering couple. I'll give you 24 hours to make your decision, he said. Choose wisely. As the door closed behind him, Spencer allowed himself a small smile. The game was over, and he had won. Scott Cahill paced his office like a caged animal, his usually immaculate appearance in disarray. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his shirt was rumpled from hours of frantic work. The past few weeks had been a nightmare, each of his carefully laid plans crumbling to dust. He grabbed his phone, dialing Kristen's number for the 5th time that day. Straight to voicemail. Again. Damn it, Kristen, he snarled, hurling the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack. A tentative knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Mr. Cahill, his assistant's voice was hesitant. The board is waiting for you in the conference room. Scott took a deep breath, straightening his tie and smoothing down his hair. He couldn't let them see him like this. He had to be in control. He had to have a plan. As he strode into the conference room, the tension was palpable. The board members sat in stony silence, their faces grim. Gentlemen, Scott began, summoning every ounce of charm and confidence he possessed. "I know the past few weeks have been challenging, but I assure you, Cahill Tech is stronger than ever. Our takeover of Durham Tech is proceeding as planned." The lead board member, a stern-faced man named Harrison, leaned forward. "Is that so, Scott? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like we're hemorrhaging money and credibility by the hour." Scott opened his mouth to respond, but Harrison cut him off. "Save it. We've heard enough of your assurances. What we need now are results. You have 48 hours to turn this around, or we're pulling the plug on the takeover and reevaluating your position as CEO." The words hit Scott like a physical blow. He nodded stiffly, then turned and left the room without another word. Back in his office, Scott's mind raced. He needed a win, and he needed it now. His eyes fell on a file folder on his desk, one he'd been saving as a last resort. He picked up his phone, the spare he kept in his desk drawer, and dialed a number he'd sworn he'd never use. "It's Cahill," he said when the line connected. "I need everything you've got on Spencer Durham, and I mean everything. I don't care how you get it, just get it done." As he hung up, Scott felt a cold sense of calm settle over him. He was all in now. It was do or die. Across town, Spencer Durham sat in his office, a small smile playing on his lips as he watched the latest financial report scroll across his screen. Cahill Tech's stock was in freefall, and rumors of federal investigations were swirling through the tech world. His phone buzzed. A text from John Turner, his mole in Cahill Tech. "SC making desperate moves. Be ready." Spencer's smile widened. He'd been waiting for this. He picked up his desk phone, dialing a familiar number. "Danny, it's time. Release the dossier." Within hours, the tech world was in an uproar. Leaked documents detailing years of corporate espionage and unethical business practices by Scott Cahill and Cahill Tech were splashed across every major news outlet. Spencer watched from his office as CNBC ran a breaking news banner. Cahill Tech CEO Scott Cahill implicated in massive corporate scandal. His phone rang. It was Abby. "You seeing this?" she asked, a note of awe in her voice. "Oh, I'm seeing it," Spencer replied, his tone satisfied. "You know he's going to come after you with everything he's got now, right?" Abby's voice held a hint of concern. Spencer's laugh was cold. "Let him try. I'm ready." The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Cahill Tech's stock plummeted to record lows as investors scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Key employees, sensing the sinking ship, began jumping en masse to competitors, many of them to Durham Tech, thanks to carefully placed job offers from John Turner. Scott Cahill watched in horror as his empire crumbled around him. His phone rang constantly, board members demanding explanations, lawyers warning of impending lawsuits, reporters hungry for comments. In a final, desperate move, Scott booked a red-eye flight to the Cayman Islands, where he had a secret bank account with enough money to start a new life. He was halfway to the airport when his car was suddenly surrounded by black SUVs. FBI agents swarmed out, weapons drawn. Scott Cahill, the lead agent, announced as Scott was dragged from his car. "You're under arrest for securities fraud, corporate espionage, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Scott's eyes met those of Spencer Durham, who stood watching from the shadows. Spencer's face was impassive, but his eyes held a glint of cold satisfaction. With Scott Cahill's arrest dominating the headlines, Kristen Durham found herself alone and desperate. Her carefully constructed world was falling apart, and she knew she had one last card to play. She filed for divorce, still clinging to the belief that she could claim half of Spencer's assets. It was her right, after all. She'd been by his side as he built Durham Tech. She deserved her share. The first day of the divorce proceedings dawned bright and clear. Kristen strode into the courtroom, head held high, dressed in her most expensive suit. She faltered slightly when she saw Spencer, looking calm and collected at the defendant's table. Her lawyer, a shark in an Armani suit, stood to make their opening statement. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Durham, is entitled to half of all marital assets, including Mr. Durham's shares in Durham Tech. She was a supportive wife who— Objection, Your Honor, interrupted a voice from Spencer's table. A tall, imposing woman stood up. Jordan Foley, Spencer's attorney. Before we proceed, we have evidence that directly contradicts Mrs. Durham's claims. The judge nodded. Proceed, Miss Foley. What followed was a masterclass in legal evisceration. Jordan presented a mountain of evidence. Surveillance photos of Kristen's affair with Scott Cale, financial records showing her attempts to hide assets, emails detailing her involvement in corporate espionage against Durham Tech. Kristen felt the blood drain from her face as her carefully constructed narrative crumbled. She turned to her lawyer, who looked equally shell-shocked. Furthermore, Your Honor, Jordan continued, her voice ringing through the stunned courtroom, we are countersuing Mrs. Durham for damages caused to Durham Tech through her actions. The judge's gavel came down like a thunderclap. In light of this evidence, I'm rejecting Mrs. Durham's claim to Durham Tech assets. Moreover, I'm ordering Mrs. Durham to pay damages for her role in corporate espionage. She will retain only her personal belongings and a small alimony, as determined by the court. Kristen stumbled out of the courtroom, her mind reeling. How had it come to this? How had Spencer outmaneuvered her so completely? As she pushed through the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse, she caught sight of Spencer talking quietly with his lawyer. For a moment, their eyes met. Kristen saw no triumph in Spencer's gaze, no gloating, just a cold, implacable resolve that chilled her to her core. She turned away, suddenly understanding the magnitude of her mistake. She had underestimated Spencer, had thought him weak, easily manipulated. Now she was paying the price. Months passed. The tech world slowly recovered from the Cahill Tech scandal, with Durham Tech emerging as a dominant force in the industry. Spencer threw himself into his work, pushing the boundaries of quantum computing and artificial intelligence. One afternoon, as Spencer sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Mr. Durham? A hesitant voice said when he answered. This is Sarah from Pinewood Rehabilitation Center. I'm calling about Kristen Durham. She's asked to speak with you. Spencer's hand tightened on the phone. He hadn't heard from Kristen since the divorce. He knew she'd checked into rehab as part of a plea deal to avoid jail time for her role in the corporate espionage. What does she want? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. She says she wants to make amends, Sarah replied. She's been making good progress in her treatment, and this is part of her recovery process. Spencer was silent for a long moment. Part of him wanted to refuse, to hang up and never think about Kristen again. But another part, a part he thought he'd buried, was curious. All right, he said finally. Tell her I'll meet her, but not at the rehab center. There's a cafe called the Blue Door. I'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m. The next day, Spencer arrived at the Blue Door precisely at 2. He chose a table in the back where they wouldn't be easily overheard. Kristen walked in a few minutes later. Spencer almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes. This Kristen looked softer somehow, more real. She hesitated when she saw him, then squared her shoulders and walked over. Spencer, she said softly, thank you for agreeing to meet me. Spencer nodded, gesturing for her to sit. You wanted to talk, so talk. Kristen took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. Several. Actually, what I did to you, to us, it was unforgivable. Spencer said nothing, his face impassive. I've been doing a lot of thinking in rehab, Kristen continued. A lot of soul searching. And I realized I was scared. Scared of losing the lifestyle I'd become accustomed to. Scared of being left behind as you became more and more successful. She laughed bitterly. Pretty ironic, considering I ended up losing everything anyway. Why are you telling me this, Kristen? Spencer asked, his voice carefully controlled. Because I need you to know that I understand now. I understand the pain I caused, the trust one betrayed. And I'm truly, deeply sorry." Kristen's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Spencer. I know I don't deserve that. I needed you to know." Spencer was silent for a long moment, studying Kristen's face. He saw genuine remorse there, a far cry from the cold, calculating woman he divorced. "I appreciate you telling me this," he said finally. "I can't forgive you, Kristen. Not now, maybe not ever. But I hope you find peace." Kristen nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you, Spencer, for everything." As they stood to leave, Spencer felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd carried the anger and betrayal for so long. It had become a part of him. But now, facing Kristen's genuine remorse, he felt something he hadn't expected: release. They parted ways outside the cafe, likely for the last time. As Spencer watched Kristen walk away, he felt a sense of closure wash over him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Abby. "Dinner tonight? That new Thai place on Fifth." Spencer smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. He typed out a quick reply. "Sounds perfect. See you at 7. As he walked to his car, Spencer reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd faced betrayal, fought against seemingly insurmountable odds, and emerged stronger. And now, as he looked to the future, he felt a spark of excitement. That evening, as Spencer sat across from Abby in the cozy Thai restaurant, he found himself laughing genuinely for the first time in what felt like years. They talked about everything and nothing: work, family, their shared love of obscure sci-fi novels. As he watched Abby's eyes light up while she recounted a funny story about her latest art project, Spencer felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the spicy curry in front of him. He realized then that sometimes, from the ashes of betrayal, something new and potentially beautiful could emerge. And for the first time in a long time, Spencer Durham looked to the future with hope.